Hey there, tonight we're uncovering life under Genghis Khan as he unified the Mongol tribes. Not the barbarian blitzkrieg you might expect, but a society where meritocracy ruled and silk-wrapped diplomacy thrived. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the vast, unforgiving steppes of 12th century Mongolia, where the weather forecast was always a toss-up between biting wind and more biting wind, a boy named Temujin was born. This kid would eventually grow up to be Genghis Khan, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, he had to survive a childhood that would make a Dickensian orphan look like they were living at Club Med. Temujin entered the world around 1162, give or take a year. History's a bit fuzzy on the exact date, probably because nobody had time to scribble down birthdays when they were busy dodging arrows and wolves. His father, Yesujay, was a tribal chief of the Borjigin clan, but don't let that fool you into thinking Temujin was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. More like a wooden one, if he was lucky. You see, Temujin's early life wasn't all horseback riding and eagle hunting. When he was just 9, his father was poisoned by a rival clan, the Tartars. Yes, poison, a classic move in the Mongol playbook, long before it became a staple in Shakespearean drama. This little family feud was like a prologue to Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, and with a lot more yurt life. With Yesujay out of the picture, Temujin's family found themselves abandoned by their own tribe, left to fend for themselves in a landscape that was more survival of the fittest than community garden. The young Temujin learned the hard way that family ties on the steppes were as fragile as a spider's web in a sandstorm. His early years were a masterclass in grit and grim determination. He grew up in a world where alliances shifted faster than a modern political campaign. His family was forced to live off the land, think extreme foraging, but without the gourmet restaurant ending. At one point, Temujin was even captured and enslaved by a rival clan, which seems like a bad start for someone who'd later be known for uniting the Mongol tribes. But if resilience were a sport, Temujin would have been an Olympic gold medalist. As Temujin matured, he began to understand the power of both fear and charm. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a strategist, someone who viewed a battlefield like a chessboard. And oh boy, did he know how to play those pieces. But first he needed allies, and he was willing to trade, negotiate, and occasionally burn bridges to get them. Marriage was his first move. He married Bert, securing a powerful alliance with the Anggerat tribe. This wasn't just a romantic stroll to the altar. It was a calculated political maneuver that would make Machiavelli tip his cap. In his 20s, Temujin began to gather followers, not just because he had a winning smile, but because he offered something rare on the steppes, stability and spoils. He introduced a meritocratic system where loyalty and skill trumped bloodline. Imagine that, a society where you could climb the ladder without a famous last name. This was revolutionary in a world where lineage often determined your station in life. But Temujin's rise wasn't all smooth sailing, or galloping in his case. He faced constant battles, not just against rival tribes, but within his own ranks. The Mongol world was a cauldron of simmering feuds and rivalries, often boiling over into open conflict. Yet, through a mix of diplomacy, charisma, and sheer force of will, Temujin managed to unite the disparate Mongol tribes by 1206, a feat that seemed as improbable as herding cats. If cats could wield swords and ride horses, uniting the Mongol tribes was no small feat. It was a bit like trying to convince a group of fiercely independent freelancers to join the same corporation. By 1206, he had been proclaimed Genghis Khan, which translates roughly to universal ruler. A humble title, right? His tactics combined ruthless efficiency with a keen understanding of human nature. He knew when to offer a hand and when to wield the sword, a balancing act that few could master without losing their heads, literally. His leadership style was a blend of carrot and very big stick. Genghis Khan was known for rewarding loyalty with lands and titles, but he was equally famous for punishing betrayal with brutal efficiency. The message was clear. You were better off as a friend than a foe. Under his command, the Mongol army became an unstoppable force, moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine across the steppes, consuming territory as if it were a buffet. Genghis Khan's unification of the Mongol tribes wasn't just a triumph of military might, it was a social revolution. He implemented laws that promoted trade, punished theft, and protected the poor. His legal code, the Yasa, was a blend of traditional Mongol practices and innovative ideas, creating a framework that kept his burgeoning empire from descending into chaos. As we wrap up this first chapter of Genghis Khan's life, it's clear that his early experiences, filled with hardship, betrayal, and a good dash of survivalism, shaped him into the formidable leader he would become. The Mongol Empire was more than just a collection of conquered lands. It was a testament to the power of one man's vision and his ability to turn a ragtag collection of tribes into one of the most formidable forces the world had ever seen. But don't get too comfortable. The story's just getting started, and the real action is yet to come. The Mongol Empire's momentum was anything but ordinary, driven by a military machine that was as efficient as it was ferocious. If Genghis Khan's early life had been a warm-up act, his military conquests were the main event, where he truly showcased his prowess. Forget about the lumbering medieval armies of Europe, with their clunky armor and predictable tactics. Genghis and his merry band of marauders were like a storm on horseback, a whirlwind of hooves, arrows, and strategy that left the world in awe and terror. Let's talk horsepower, literally. The Mongol army's reliance on horses was no romanticized tale of knights in shining armor. No, these were tough, scrappy steppe ponies, about as glamorous as a pack mule, but with the stamina of a marathon runner. These equine MVPs could cover up to 100 miles a day, each a heart-out Tour de France, allowing Mongol warriors to appear out of nowhere, strike with precision, and vanish before their enemies even knew what hit them. Each warrior had a string of mounts, typically 3 to 5, ensuring that no single horse was overworked. The result, an army that moved at lightning speed, a medieval blitzkrieg if ever there was one. And then there were the infamous compound bows, the secret sauce in Genghis Khan's recipe for conquest. These weapons were a marvel of engineering, combining layers of wood, horn, and sinew to create a bow that was both compact and powerful, kind of like the iPhone of the 13th century, but with more deadly applications. The Mongol bows had a range of over 350 yards, allowing them to rain down arrows with deadly accuracy long before their enemies could even think of retaliating. This wasn't just archery. This was the ancient art of domination. But how did Genghis manage to keep such a well-oiled operation running in the middle of nowhere? Logistics, my friends, the unsung hero of military history. Feeding thousands of warriors in the vastness of the steppe was no small feat. Forget supply lines stretching across miles. The Mongols were the original self-sufficient units. Their diet was as no-nonsense as their warfare. Meat, milk, and fermented mare's milk, or kumis, which could knock out a lightweight drinker faster than you can say pasteurization. A Mongol warrior could subsist on minimal rations, and their herds provided a mobile pantry that followed them into battle. The organizational genius of the Mongol military was in its division and leadership. The army was structured in units of 10, a simple yet effective system that allowed for flexibility and quick decision-making. Above all, Genghis Khan trusted his generals, a cadre of leaders chosen not by birthright, but by merit. This was a revolutionary approach in a world where nepotism was often the order of the day. Each man knew his role and executed it with precision, creating a force that was greater than the sum of its parts. And then there was the psychological warfare. Genghis understood that fear was as potent a weapon as any sword or bow. His reputation for ruthlessness preceded him, often causing cities to surrender without a fight. The choice was stark: submit and be incorporated into the empire, or resist and face annihilation. This wasn't just brutality for brutality's sake. It was a calculated strategy to minimize resistance and maximize efficiency. But let's not get swept away by the romance of Mongol efficiency without acknowledging the grim realities. This was an era of conquest that left vast swaths of Asia and Europe in ruins. Cities were razed, populations decimated, and entire cultures altered in the blink of an eye. Genghis Khan's campaigns were a double-edged sword, bringing both destruction and, paradoxically, a kind of order. Roads were built, trade routes established, and a rudimentary postal system ensured that messages traveled across the empire faster than a medieval email. Yet, it's tempting to view Genghis Khan as a larger-than-life figure, a conquering hero or a villain, depending on which side of the historical fence you sit. The truth, as always, is more nuanced. He was a product of his environment, a man who harnessed the harshness of the steppe to forge one of history's most formidable empires. His legacy is one of contrasts, a unifier and a destroyer, a leader and a tyrant, a visionary and a despot. As the Mongol Empire galloped across the pages of history, it left a mixed legacy of innovation and devastation. Genghis Khan's military machine was a marvel of strategic planning and ruthless execution, a testament to the power of vision and the relentless pursuit of dominance. But we're not done yet. There's more to this story than just battles and bloodshed. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complexities of one of history's most fascinating empires. As the Mongol Empire thundered across the sands of history, its real genius wasn't just in how it conquered, but how it governed. Genghis Khan, the man who could turn a battlefield into a chessboard of chaos, had a few tricks up his sleeve when it came to ruling an empire that stretched from the steppes of Mongolia to the gates of Europe. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all about brute force and horseback heroics. Let's dive into the Yasa, Genghis Khan's legal code. This wasn't just some dusty scroll of do's and don'ts. It was a living document, an ancient version of a terms and conditions agreement that nobody could opt out of. The Yasa was a blend of traditional steppe customs and new laws that Genghis crafted to keep his empire from imploding like a badly built yurt. It covered everything from military discipline to theft, and even family law. The code was famously strict. Stealing a horse, for example, could earn you a one-way ticket to the afterlife. It was a tough world, and Genghis didn't mince words or actions. But here's the kicker. The Yasa also protected the poor and promoted trade, creating a peculiar kind of order amid the chaos of conquest. Speaking of commerce, the Mongols were the Amazon prime of the 13th century. They established trade routes that made the Silk Road look like a pedestrian footpath. By linking the East and West, they facilitated cultural exchanges that would make modern globalization look like a neighborhood swap meet. They even implemented a postal system that was shockingly efficient. Picture this, a network of relay stations dotting the empire, staffed by riders who could cover 200 miles in a day, ensuring that Genghis could send messages faster than you can say express delivery. The Yam, as it was called, was like a medieval FedEx, minus the tracking numbers. Now, let's tackle the stereotype of the Mongols as unwashed barbarians. It's a myth as persistent as a hangover, but the reality is a bit more nuanced. Yes, they lived a nomadic lifestyle, but they also had a keen sense of hygiene. Baths were a big deal in the Mongol world. Genghis himself reportedly loved a good soak, and his soldiers were known for their grooming, something that might surprise you if you've been picturing them as extras from a post-apocalyptic movie. In fact, when compared to their European counterparts, who believed that bathing could open the pores to evil spirits, or worse, the common cold, the Mongols were practically spa enthusiasts. But beyond cleanliness, the Mongols were cultural magpies, picking up useful bits and pieces from the societies they conquered. They were like the ultimate open-source platform, integrating and improving technologies from China, Persia, and the Islamic world. They adopted paper currency, which made trade far easier than lugging around sacks of silver. They were also fans of medical practices from their neighbors, incorporating everything from herbal remedies to surgical techniques. This wasn't just cultural appropriation, it was cultural optimization. Genghis Khan's administrative prowess was a lesson in pragmatism. He knew that to rule an empire that spanned continents, he needed more than just an iron fist. He needed a network of loyal governors and administrators who could implement his vision on the ground. He appointed talented leaders, often from the ranks of the conquered, proving that talent and loyalty were more valuable than tribal ties. This wasn't just a nod to meritocracy. It was a savvy move to ensure stability. After all, an empire is only as strong as its weakest link, and Genghis was determined to have none. The Mongols' knack for administration also extended to religious tolerance. In an era when religious wars were as common as chickenpox, Genghis Khan took a decidedly modern approach. allowing freedom of worship across his empire. This wasn't born out of some 13th century enlightenment. It was cold, hard strategy. By allowing religious leaders to practice and preach, he kept them from becoming political agitators. It was a brilliant move that ensured peace and loyalty from diverse populations. After all, why fight over guards when you could be fighting for Genghis? So, what's the takeaway from this whirlwind tour of Mongol administration? Genghis Khan was not just a military genius, but an administrative visionary. He understood that the sword might win battles, but it's the pen and the postal system and the legal code that keeps an empire together. His legacy is a mix of light and shadow, a testament to the complexities of leadership in an age when the world was both vast and intimately connected. As we continue to unravel the intricacies of Mongol rule, remember that the true genius of Genghis Khan lay not just in how he conquered, but in how he governed. And the story is far from over, so buckle up. There's more to come in this epic saga of power, conquest, and the indomitable will of a man who shaped the course of history like few others before or since. So, as we dive deeper into the Mongol Empire, let's take a moment to shed some light on the unsung heroes or heroines, rather of this vast historical tapestry, the women of the Mongol society. Because for all the tales of Genghis Khan's testosterone-fueled conquests, it turns out the ladies were running a pretty tight ship back at the yurt. Imagine this, a society where women wielded more than just the power to churn butter. Mongol women had rights that would make their medieval European counterparts green with envy. They could own property, initiate divorce, and even participate in political and military decisions. In fact, when it came to realpolitik, Mongol women were the original power brokers, while Genghis Khan and his sons were off painting the world in shades of Mongol. It was often their wives and daughters who managed the home front, ensuring that the gears of governance kept turning. Take Turigine Khatun, for instance. After the death of her husband, Urjide Khan, in 1241, she ruled the empire as regent for 5 years. That's right, folks. She wasn't just keeping the throne warm. She was actively directing the affairs of state, negotiating with foreign powers, and handling internal politics with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat. Turigine was no anomaly either. Mongol history is peppered with formidable women who played pivotal roles in the empire's administration and succession planning. Now, let's wander over to the Mongol religious landscape, a veritable smorgasbord of beliefs where polytheism, shamanism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam all found a place at the table. The Mongols were pragmatic when it came to religion. They believed in hedging their spiritual bets. Genghis Khan himself didn't commit to one faith, preferring instead to consult with shamans and spiritual leaders from various religions. It was all about keeping divine options open, because you never know which deity might come through in a pinch. This religious tolerance wasn't just an act of benevolence, it was a clever political strategy. By allowing conquered peoples to keep their faiths, Genghis Khan ensured a smoother transition into Mongol rule. He was like the ultimate crossover episode, uniting different narratives under one empire. This policy of religious freedom not only placated the masses, but also attracted talented individuals from various cultures who contributed to the empire's administration and culture. But before we get too cozy with the idea of a Mongol utopia, let's talk about the less pleasant side of their regime, dissent and its consequences. Spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty. The Mongols had a zero-tolerance policy for rebellion, and their methods of quelling it were as creative as they were brutal. Consider the fate of Nishapur in 1221, where a revolt led to the deaths of Genghis Khan's envoy and son-in-law. What followed was a massacre so severe that some sources claim the city was left with a pile of skulls. Whether this is an exaggeration or not, it paints a vivid picture of the Mongol approach to dissent. Swift, severe, and strategically terrifying. But here's the kicker. For those who played nice, life under Mongol rule wasn't all doom and gloom. In fact, being an ally of the Mongols could be quite lucrative. They were known for rewarding loyalty with autonomy and trade privileges. Cities that voluntarily submitted often retained local rulers and were integrated into the empire's vast trade network, enjoying the benefits of protection and prosperity. It was a bit like signing a franchise deal with a very aggressive business partner who just happened to own half the known world. So, Why did some cities choose to align with the Mongols? Simple. The promise of wealth and stability outweighed the risks of resistance. The Mongols were the brokers of a new world order, offering a kind of Pax Mongolica that fostered trade and cultural exchange across Asia and Europe. Under their rule, the Silk Road flourished, and merchants from Venice to Beijing found their fortunes multiplying faster than you could say Marco Polo. But let's not romanticize this as some kind of medieval golden age of commerce. While the Mongol Empire did bring unprecedented connectivity, it also demanded tribute and loyalty in return. It was a protection racket on a grand scale, and cities that fell out of favor could find themselves on the receiving end of Mongol wrath faster than you can say restructuring plan. And therein lies the duality of the Mongol legacy, a blend of innovation and intimidation, a fusion of progress and peril. As we continue to explore the next chapters of this sprawling saga, keep in mind that the story of the Mongols is one of contrasts, of a people who could be both brutal conquerors and benevolent rulers, depending on which side of the Mongol saddle you found yourself on. Stay tuned as we unravel more layers of this complex narrative, where the lines between legend and reality are as blurred as the horizon on the endless steppe. As the Mongol Empire galloped forward, leaving behind a trail of both destruction and innovation, the inevitable end loomed on the horizon. Genghis Khan, the man who had turned the world into his personal chessboard, died in 1227 under circumstances as enigmatic as the man himself. Some say he fell from a horse, others whisper of illness, and a few tales even toss in a vengeful spirit for good measure. But let's not get caught up in ghost stories. What matters is that his death marked the start of a new chapter, one that would see his empire both fragment and flourish in unexpected ways. With Genghis gone, the Mongol Empire was like a well-oiled machine missing its master mechanic. But fear not, because Genghis had left behind a hefty brood to take over the family business. His descendants, known as the Khans of the four great Khanates, divided the empire like a giant pizza, each slice with its own unique toppings of chaos and conquest. We had the Yuan dynasty in China, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. Each Khanate had its own flavor of governance, but they all shared the same Mongol DNA, a penchant for expansion and a taste for power. Now, when you have an empire that stretches across Eurasia, there are bound to be family squabbles. The Mongol ruling class had more drama than a reality TV show, with betrayals, alliances, and the occasional poison plot. The empire's division was both its strength and its Achilles heel. On one hand, it allowed for localized governance that was adaptive and responsive. On the other, it planted the seeds of disunity that would eventually lead to its downfall. It's like giving everyone in a rock band their own solo career. Great in theory, but someone's bound to fall off the charts. But let's not write off the Mongols just yet. Even divided, the Mongol Empire was a force to be reckoned with. Take Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson, who established the Yuan dynasty in China and ruled with a blend of Mongol might and Chinese sophistication. Under his reign, from 1271 to 1294, China saw a golden era of trade and cultural exchange. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant and explorer, famously visited Kublai's court, bringing tales of Mongol splendor back to Europe. Kublai was the ultimate fusion of East meets West, a ruler who understood that power wasn't just about swinging a sword, but also about wielding a paintbrush and a ledger. Meanwhile, in Persia, the Ilkhanate under Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis, played its own game of thrones, balancing between Mongol traditions and Persian bureaucracy. The Ilkhanate was a cultural melting pot, where architects, mathematicians, and scholars from different cultures exchanged ideas like they were trading cards. It was a period of intellectual renaissance, with advancements in science and art that would echo through the ages. Yet, the Ilkhanate also showcased the Mongol knack for brutality, like when they sacked Baghdad in 1258, a city so culturally rich it was known as the jewel of the world. The Mongols' approach was less jewel polishing, more jewel pulverizing. In Russia, the Golden Horde thrived by controlling the lucrative trade routes between Europe and Asia. The Horde ruled over the Rus with a mix of fear and fiscal finesse. demanding tribute in a system that resembled a medieval tax scheme with a side of intimidation. Yet this Mongol rule inadvertently unified the Russian principalities, setting the stage for the rise of Moscow as a power center. It's a classic case of unintended consequences. The Mongols, by trying to dominate, actually laid the groundwork for a future Russian empire. The Chagatai Khanate, stretching across Central Asia, was the wild card in the Mongol deck. It was a region where the Silk Road thrived, linking the East with the West in a tapestry of trade and cultural exchange. Yet it was also a hotbed of internal strife, with local rulers often at odds. The Chagatai Khanate exemplified the challenges of maintaining unity in a vast and diverse empire. So what's the takeaway from all this Mongol maneuvering? For all their conquests and chaos, the Mongols were unwitting architects of a new world order. They connected continents, fostered trade, and spread ideas at a pace that would make even modern logisticians blush. But they also left behind a legacy of destruction and cultural upheaval, a double-edged sword that cut both ways. And what of Genghis Khan himself? Is he the hero of this story, or its villain? The truth is, he's a bit of both, a man of contradictions who could be as brutal as he was visionary. His legacy is like a Rorschach test, revealing more about the viewer than the subject. To some, he's a barbarian who brought death and destruction on an unprecedented scale. To others, he's a unifier who laid the foundations for modern civilization. Perhaps the most accurate depiction is that of a man who understood his time and placed better than anyone else, a leader who turned the harsh realities of the steppe into a springboard for greatness. So, as we close the book on the Mongol Empire, let's remember that history is never black and white. It's a swirling mass of greys, where heroes can be villains, and vice versa. Genghis Khan was a product of his environment, a man who harnessed the chaos of the steppes to create something remarkable. His empire may have crumbled, but the ripples of his legacy continue to shape our world in ways both seen and unseen. And that, dear listener, is the true genius of history, its ability to surprise, to confound, and to remind us that the past is never really past. It's alive and kicking, shaping our world just as surely as Genghis Khan once shaped his. Liu Bang wasn't your typical emperor, not by a long shot. Picture a guy who started his career as a lowly peasant, probably grumbling about taxes while ploughing fields. He's not exactly the poster child for imperial ambition. Yet by 202 BCE, this very man was crowned Emperor Geazu, the founder of the mighty Han Dynasty. Talk about a glow-up. It's like if someone told you the guy flipping burgers at your local fast food joint will be president in a decade. Just goes to show, underestimate the underdog at your own peril. So, how did Liu Bang pull off this impossible feat? Well, it all started with the implosion of the Qin dynasty in 206 BCE. The Qin had managed to unify China for the first time, but their rule was about as pleasant as a root canal. The emperor's motto might as well have been my way or the highway, with a side of build me a wall and make it great. The Great Wall, terracotta warriors, standardization of everything from currency to axle lengths. It was all Qin handiwork. But their reign was short, just 15 years, because surprise, surprise, people don't love being oppressed. Enter Liu Bang, who was initially more of a Han Solo than a Han Emperor, a small-time official turned rebel leader. He saw the chaos of the Qin downfall as his golden ticket. In those days, China was the wild, wild East. Warlords were playing musical thrones, and Liu Bang had his eye on the prize. He wasn't just a man with a plan. He was a man with a knack for making the right friends, like the brilliant strategist Zhang Liang and the warlord Han Xin. They were the brains and brawn behind Liu's rise, kind of like the ancient Chinese version of Ocean's 11. By the time the dust settled, Liu Bang had ousted his main rival, Xiang Yu, in a classic case of last man standing. Xiang Yu was the guy everyone thought would win, tall, strong, with movie star looks. But Liu Bang had something more important, cunning and persistence. He played the long game, outmaneuvering Xiang Yu at every turn, until finally, in 202 BCE, he declared himself Emperor Geazu of the Han Dynasty. And just like that, Liu Bang went from zero to hero, from plowman to sovereign. Now, you might think ruling an empire is all about sitting on a throne, waving a scepter, and looking majestic. But Liu Bang quickly learned that keeping an empire together was like herding cats. Only the cats were rebellious nobles and restless border tribes. The Han Dynasty stretched over 5 million square miles, a patchwork of cultures, languages, and all kinds of fun local customs. Imagine trying to keep everyone happy and not revolting when they couldn't even agree on how to pronounce rice. First on his to-do list was making nice with the nobles. These were the guys who had a penchant for stabbing each other in the back, literally and figuratively. Liu Bang had to ensure they were more interested in throwing banquets than rebellions. He parceled out fiefdoms and titles like opera giving away cars. You get a province, and you get a province. But unlike opera's giveaways, this had strings attached. He was buying loyalty, not just selling a feel-good story. Then there was the Xingnu, the nomadic horse lords to the north, who were basically the Mongols before the Mongols. They had a habit of swooping down and raiding Chinese villages, which was a bit of a problem for a fledgling dynasty trying to project power. Liu Bang tried the carrot and stick approach, where the stick was a military campaign that ended in a humbling defeat. So he switched to the carrot, marriage alliances and bribes. Think of it as ancient diplomacy with a hint of desperation. Running an empire wasn't cheap, and Liu Bang had to figure out how to fill the coffers without inciting the kind of peasant revolts that had toppled the Qin. Taxation was a necessary evil, but he had to keep it reasonable, or else he'd be back to square one with torch-wielding villagers at the palace gates. The Qin had taxed like they were trying to fund a pyramid scheme, so Liu Bang aimed for something a bit more sustainable, with a lower risk of getting overthrown. Despite the challenges, Liu Bang's reign marked a new era of stability and prosperity. The Han Dynasty would go on to last over 4 centuries, becoming one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization. But all of that was still in the future. For now, Liu Bang was just trying to keep his head above water, balancing the demands of governance with the expectations of an empire. It was a high-wire act with no safety net. But if anyone could do it, it was the man who'd clawed his way from peasant to emperor, defying all odds, and maybe teaching us a thing or two about the power of persistence and the occasional well-timed bribe. While Liu Bang was busy trying to keep the empire's wheels from falling off, fast forward a few generations and meet Emperor Wu, the Han Dynasty's economic mastermind who'd make modern-day entrepreneurs look like they're playing with monopoly money. Emperor Wu, or Han Wudi if you're on nickname terms, reigned from 141 to 87 BCE, and was the kind of guy who looked at a map and saw opportunity, not just borders. If Liu Bang laid the foundation, Emperor Wu built the skyscraper. Now, the crown jewel of Wu's economic empire was undoubtedly the Silk Road, a term that conjures up images of mystique, adventure, and exotic goods. It was basically the Amazon Prime of the ancient world, minus the 2-day shipping, but with way more camels. Stretching over 4,000 miles, this trade route was the first real instance of globalization, connecting China with the farthest reaches of the Roman Empire. Talk about a long-distance relationship. But let's get real. Opening the Silk Road wasn't just about sending silk sashes to Roman senators who wanted to up their toga game. No, it was about power, influence, and a pile of cash high enough to make Scrooge McDuck envious. Silk was China's secret weapon, the ancient world's equivalent of a tech innovation. By the time it reached Rome, it was worth its weight in gold, quite literally. We're talking hundreds of pounds of silk making its way west, with a markup that'd make a Wall Street broker blush. The Silk Road wasn't just a one-way street, though. Goods flowed both ways. From the west came glassware, spices, and horses, because who doesn't want to upgrade their cavalry with some thoroughbred steeds? And let's not forget the cultural exchange. Ideas, religions, and even diseases hitchhiked along the trade routes, turning the Silk Road into a superhighway of human experience. Now, was this booming economy the result of Wu's genius economic policies, or just a stroke of good fortune? It's a bit of both, really. Wu was smart enough to recognize the potential and throw state resources into the mix, but he also got lucky. The world was hungry for silk, and China was the only game in town. It was a seller's market, and Emperor Wu was the guy holding all the cards. Of course, no economic story is complete without its share of drama, and the Silk Road had plenty. Imagine a sprawling network of trade routes crawling with caravan bandits, the ancient world's answer to insider trading scandals. These were the guys who'd make off with your silk shipment faster than you could say, trade deficit. Bandits weren't just a nuisance. They were a real threat to the empire's bottom line, kind of like a stock market crash that happened one camel at a time. But Wu was no slouch. He beefed up the military presence along critical sections of the route, turning what could have been an economic Achilles heel into a robust artery of commerce. Imagine the Great Wall, but for silk caravans. It wasn't foolproof. Bandits were a crafty bunch, but it was enough to keep the silk flowing and the economy growing. Now, let's not overlook the internal impact of all this trade. With the influx of wealth came urbanization on a grand scale. Cities expanded, markets thrived, and suddenly everyone wanted a slice of the imperial pie. Merchants became the new rock stars, their wealth sometimes rivaling that of nobles. This was the Han Dynasty's golden age, where prosperity wasn't just a buzzword but a way of life. But as with all things, there was a darker side. The wealth gap widened, and social tensions simmered under the surface. It was a classic case of the rich getting richer while the poor continued to plow the fields. The government tried to manage this by controlling prices and monopolizing certain industries, like salt and iron. But it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a bucket. The bureaucracy expanded, and with it, the opportunities for corruption. Yet, despite these challenges, the Han Dynasty under Emperor Wu became a juggernaut, a testament to the power of trade and the allure of silk. It was a time when the world got a little smaller and a lot more connected, a time when the East met the West not just in battle, but in business. And as the silk flowed across continents, so too did the seeds of something much larger than any one empire, a truly interconnected world. And just like that, the Silk Road became more than a trade route. It was a lifeline for an empire that knew how to turn silk into gold and dreams into reality. But stay tuned, because the story of the Han Dynasty is far from over, and what goes up must eventually come down, especially when there's a parade of caravan bandits in the mix. As the Silk Road buzzed with commerce and intrigue, Emperor Wu had more than just economics on his mind. Enter Confucianism, the philosophical equivalent of a cultural rock band, complete with a loyal fan base and a surprising amount of staying power. By the time Emperor Wu took the throne, Confucianism was gaining traction faster than a viral meme. It promised a harmonious society, structured governance, and ethical living, which sounded like a pretty sweet deal compared to the chaos of constant warring states. Now, Emperor Wu didn't just dabble in Confucianism. He went all in, making it the official state doctrine around 136 BCE. It was like he swapped the empire's old operating system for a shiny new upgrade. Suddenly, scholars were the new celebrities, revered not for their fashion sense or Instagram followers, but for their mastery of Confucian classics. They were the intellectual elite, minus the paparazzi. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this scholarly utopia. The reality was less about philosophical enlightenment and more about establishing control. With Confucianism at the helm, Emperor Wu had a tool for unifying his vast empire under a single set of ideals. It was governance by moral compass, or at least the appearance of one. Confucianism extolled virtues like loyalty, filial piety, and respect for authority, which conveniently aligned with Wu's need for a stable, obedient populace. To ensure everyone sang from the same Confucian hymn book, Wu introduced the imperial examination system. And folks, this was no walk in the park. Imagine cramming your entire life's worth of knowledge into a single test that determined your career, social status, and future prospects. It was the SATs on steroids, minus the multiple-choice questions. Candidates were tested on their command of Confucian texts, and only the creme de la creme made the cut. This system was the ultimate meritocracy in theory, but in practice, it was more like a marathon where only the rich could afford the running shoes. The exams were rigorous enough to make even the most hardened academic quake in their sandals. Passing wasn't just about being smart. It was about endurance and having the resources to prepare. A bit like studying for the bar exam while juggling flaming swords. For those who succeeded, the rewards were enormous. You were practically guaranteed a cushy government job, which was the ancient equivalent of landing a gig at a Fortune 500 company. These scholar officials became the backbone of the Han bureaucracy, wielding power and prestige with their ink-stained fingers. But with great power came great responsibility, or so Confucius would have you believe. In reality, the bureaucracy could be a quagmire of inefficiency and corruption. where navigating red tape was a skill unto itself. Imagine a DMV line that stretches for miles, where every form requires 5 copies, a signature, and a personal blessing from Confucius himself. That's what dealing with Han bureaucracy could feel like. Despite Confucian ideals promoting integrity and virtue, the system was ripe for abuse. Bribes, nepotism, and favoritism were as much a part of the landscape as Confucian scrolls and inkstone. It was a classic case of ideals versus reality, a theme as old as time. Yet, despite its flaws, the Confucian system did bring a semblance of order and stability to the empire. It was the glue holding together a diverse and sprawling population. Confucian ethics permeated every aspect of life, from family hierarchies to the imperial court. Emperor Wu's endorsement wasn't just a passing trend. It was a cultural revolution with staying power, echoing through Chinese history for over 2 millennia. But of course, no doctrine is without its critics. Not everyone was sold on the Confucian dream. Legalists, Taoists, and other philosophical schools offered alternative views, often clashing with Confucian ideals. Legalism, with its emphasis on strict laws and harsh punishments, seemed like the bad cop to Confucianism's good cop. The tension between these philosophies added a layer of complexity to Han politics, like a philosophical tug-of-war that never quite resolved. While Confucianism preached harmony, the political reality was anything but. Emperor Wu's reign saw its fair share of court intrigue, power struggles, and even rebellions. It was a delicate dance between maintaining the moral high ground and wielding the iron fist when necessary. The Han court was a theatrical stage where Confucian virtues were often just that, stagecraft, a performance for the sake of appearances. Despite these contradictions, Confucianism endured, shaping the moral and ethical landscape of China long after the fall of the Han Dynasty. It was the philosophical foundation upon which future empires would build, a testament to its adaptability and appeal. But for Emperor Wu and his contemporaries, it was as much about pragmatic governance as it was about high-minded ideals. As the Han Dynasty continued to evolve, Confucianism would remain a central pillar, influencing everything from education to foreign policy. And while the scholars may not have had groupies, they certainly had influence, an influence that would outlast empires and inspire generations. But don't pop the champagne just yet. The story of the Han Dynasty is far from over. The empire still had battles to fight, both internal and external, and the next chapters promised as much drama and intrigue as any Confucian classic. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the machinations of this ancient powerhouse, exploring the next epoch of its storied existence. There's more history to uncover, myths to debunk, and plenty of lessons to learn from an era that set the stage for centuries to come. As the Han Dynasty marched forward, it wasn't just philosophy and trade routes on the imperial agenda. Nope, there was also the small matter of expanding the empire's borders. Because what's an empire without a little real estate binge? Right, Emperor Wu, with his strategic brilliance and wallet full of silk profits, was more than eager to play the classic game of Risk, ancient China edition. But conquering territories wasn't all glory and trumpet fanfare. It was a logistical quagmire that could make even the most seasoned strategist break out in a cold sweat. Let's talk military might. By the height of its power, the Han military was a behemoth, boasting an army of roughly 300, 000 to 500, 000 soldiers. These weren't weekend warriors. This was an organized killing machine. But keeping such a force in fighting trim wasn't cheap. The annual cost of maintaining this military juggernaut was enough to make any treasurer lose sleep, with estimates suggesting that military expenditures consumed up to half of the state's revenue. It was the ancient equivalent of burning money just to keep the lights on. Now, Emperor Wu wasn't content with just standing guard. Oh no, he had big plans for expansion. The Han Dynasty's territory, which started with about 5 million square miles, ballooned to nearly 3 million square miles under his watch. But all those extra miles came with their share of headaches. For starters, there was the pesky issue of subjugating the neighbors who weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Take the Xingnu, for example, those formidable nomadic horsemen who'd been a thorn in China's side for generations. They roamed the northern steppes, living out of their saddlebags and raiding with impunity. They were the original inspiration for the stereotype of the wild, untamed horse lords. Emperor Wu decided enough was enough and launched a series of campaigns to bring them to heel. The Hanksheng Wars were a saga of blood, guts, and grit, with more plot twists than a soap opera. Wu's campaigns against the Xiongnu were a military success, but at an astronomical cost. Each campaign could drain the treasury by the equivalent of tens of thousands of tons of grain, enough to feed a small city. And let's not forget the logistical nightmare of supplying an army in the field. Imagine being the quartermaster tasked with ensuring every soldier had their daily ration of rice, not to mention the weapons, armor, and horses. It was like trying to operate a food truck at Coachella, only with more swords and fewer hipsters. Roads had to be built, supply lines maintained, and morale kept high, a Herculean task that often required more creativity than sheer force. Despite these challenges, the Han did manage to extend their borders. They pushed into what is now Korea and Vietnam, regions that were more than a little reluctant to become part of the Han Club. The Han's approach to colonization was a mixture of diplomacy, military force, and cultural assimilation strategies. They'd send settlers to establish outposts, build a network of roads, and introduce Han-style administration. It was like setting up a franchise, only with more paperwork and fewer golden arches. But every empire has its breaking point, and for the Han, it was the constant game of whack-a-mole with rebellions and internal strife. The southern territories were particularly rebellious, with the Nanu Kingdom, in modern-day Vietnam, revolting not once, but twice. Each uprising was a reminder that while you could conquer a land, winning over its people was a different beast altogether. And then there was the internal political scene, a delightful mix of intrigue, betrayal, and power struggles that could put Shakespearean drama to shame. The Han court was a viper's nest, where backstabbing was practically a sport. Various factions vied for influence, and succession crises were as regular as the emperor's birthday. In such an environment, maintaining unity was like trying to herd cats that were more interested in clawing at each other than anything else. The Han dealt with these internal squabbles by expanding the bureaucracy, which was sometimes like throwing gasoline on a fire. More officials meant more opportunities for corruption, and boy, did they take those opportunities. Bribery and nepotism were rampant, and the bureaucracy often moved at a glacial pace. It was as if the empire was being run by a legion of snails armed with red tape. Yet, despite the chaos, the Han Dynasty managed to keep the show on the road, at least for a while. The empire was a tapestry of cultures, languages, and traditions, held together by the twin threads of Confucianism and military might. But every expansion had its limits, and the Han's relentless pursuit of territory would eventually sow the seeds of its own undoing. So, as we continue to unravel the story of the Han Dynasty, remember that behind every grand conquest and territorial gain lurked the gritty reality of empire building. It was a tale of ambition and avarice, of glory and grief, where the romance of conquest often gave way to the harsh truths of governance. But don't hang up your historian hat just yet. There's more to uncover in this epic saga of power, people, and politics. Stay tuned, because the Han Dynasty's journey is far from over. The Han Dynasty, a saga of splendor, strife, and silk. But as with all good things, even the Han Dynasty had to face the music. By the time the 2nd century CE rolled around, the empire was starting to feel the pinch, like a band that's been on tour for too long. Internal tensions were simmering, and the harmony was definitely off-key. Let's dive into the juicy details of how this ancient giant stumbled, with economic woes and political fiascos aplenty. First up, let's talk money, or rather, the lack thereof. The Han economy, once buoyed by the Silk Road and imperial expansion, was now taking a nosedive. A combination of overextension and mismanagement turned the treasury into a leaky bucket. The government had been spending like a teenager with their first credit card, and it was about to catch up with them. Land distribution issues were a major thorn in the side, as wealthy landowners snapped up property faster than you can say real estate bubble. This left the peasantry squeezed tighter than a pair of skinny jeans, fueling resentment and unrest. And if the economic situation wasn't chaotic enough, the political scene was a full-blown circus. Corruption in the Han bureaucracy was no secret. It was more of an open secret, like that one band member who always shows up late to rehearsal. Officials lined their pockets, and the imperial court was a revolving door of intrigue, backstabbing, and power plays. Imagine trying to run a country when your advisors are more interested in their own agendas than governing. The eunuch officials, a powerful and often vilified group, were like the empire's own shadow cabinet, pulling strings and stirring the pot whenever it suited them. Into this powder keg of discontent marched the Yellow Turban Rebellion of 184 CE, a movement that was as much about ideology as it was about desperation. A grassroots uprising led by Zhang Ju, a charismatic healer turned revolutionary. The Yellow Turbans championed the common folk, promising a utopian era of great peace. Picture a grassroots movement with a mix of mystical slogans and very real grievances. They were fed up with oppressive taxes, corrupt officials, and a government that seemed about as responsive as a broken gong. The rebellion spread like wildfire across the plains, with tens of thousands donning yellow scarves and taking up arms. It wasn't just a flash in the pan. This was a full-scale insurrection that rattled the very foundations of the Han Dynasty. The government response was swift but costly. Several years of bloody conflict ensued, draining resources and further destabilizing an already shaky empire. The rebellion didn't topple the Han immediately, but it was the equivalent of pulling the pin on a grenade and tossing it into the imperial lap. As the dust settled, the Han Dynasty found itself not just weakened, but fractured. The central authority was in tatters, and regional warlords started eyeing the throne like vultures circling a wounded animal. By 220 C, the Han Dynasty was officially kaput, replaced by the Three Kingdoms period, a tripartite division of China that made for great storytelling but terrible stability. So, what can we learn from the rise and fall of the Han Dynasty? For starters, the perils of overreach in both territory and ambition. The Han expanded their borders at breakneck speed, but the infrastructure to support such a sprawling empire was lacking. It's a classic case of biting off more than you can chew, with a side of political indigestion. Then there's the lesson of economic disparity. The Han government's failure to address growing inequality led to widespread discontent, a cautionary tale for any society that lets the wealth gap widen unchecked. The romantic image of an empire united by Confucian ideals was often just that, an image, papering over a reality that was far more divided and contentious. But let's not paint the Han Dynasty as a complete train wreck. This was an era that laid the groundwork for modern China, with advancements in arts, science, and technology that still resonate today. The Han's bureaucratic systems and cultural norms endured long after the dynasty itself crumbled, a testament to their lasting influence. It's a potent reminder that even in chaos, there can be creation. And speaking of modern China, the Han legacy remains a cornerstone of Chinese identity. The very term, Han Chinese, reflects the enduring cultural and ethnic identity that emerged during this period. It's a powerful narrative of unity, resilience, and a shared past that continues to shape China's present and future. In the end, the Han Dynasty's story is a rich tapestry of triumph and turmoil, a saga that reminds us of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise and fall, but their legacies often outlast the ruins. So next time you look at a map of China or read about its history, remember the Han Dynasty, not just for its glory, but for its glorious complexity. And if history truly is a joke that repeats itself, then the Han Dynasty offers a punchline worth pondering, that even the mightiest empires are only as strong as their weakest links, and sometimes those links are forged in the fires of ambition and hubris. So, here's to the Han Dynasty, a testament to the heights of human achievement and the depths of human folly. Cheers. So you thought being a Roman emperor was the ultimate power trip, huh? The toga, the laurel crown, the whole ruler of the known world vibe. But hold your horses, or in this case, your war elephants. Being a Roman emperor was less of a dream job, and more of a death sentence with a fancy title. You see, the life expectancy of a Roman emperor was about as reliable as the Wi-Fi in a medieval dungeon. If you managed to last a couple of years, you were doing better than most. The average reign, a measly 3 to 4 years. It's like being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company where the board meetings are more like Gladiator games. Let's kick things off with Julius Caesar, the man whose name would become synonymous with emperors for centuries. Caesar, turning into a title rather than just his moniker. Before his infamous demise in 44 BCE, he was the master of the Roman political chessboard. But even Caesar, with his near-legendary skills in both politics and warfare, couldn't outmaneuver the ultimate plot twist. 23 stab wounds delivered by what he thought were friends. Turns out, et tu, brute, is the ancient equivalent of getting unfriended on Facebook by your closest buddy, except with a lot more blood. What brought Caesar to this bloody end, you ask? Aside from his ambition, it was that pesky thing called the Senate. These guys were like the original political backstabbers, and I mean that quite literally. The Senate was a hotbed of intrigue, where power plays were as common as overpriced lattes in a hipster cafe. They were less about governance and more about survival of the shadiest. Caesar's mistake, thinking he could reform the Republic's power structure without getting a knife in the back for his trouble. Fast forward a few decades, and you meet Caligula, the emperor who's often remembered as Rome's mad tyrant. But was he really that deranged? Or was he just the victim of the world's worst PR campaign? Sure, Caligula did some wacky things, like declaring war on the sea and ordering his troops to collect seashells as spoils of victory. But when you dig into history, it's clear that his downfall was more about politics than insanity. The Senate, again, wasn't exactly thrilled with an emperor who undermined their influence and openly mocked their authority. It's like watching a reality TV star flame out. Not surprising, but still fascinating in its train wreck inevitability. Now, let's talk about the Roman political system, or lack thereof. The transition of power was essentially the Wild West, with more togas and fewer cowboy hats. There was no neat, little process for succession, no HR department to handle the handover. This was a time when claiming power could mean adopting a grown man as your son, or more often, just marching an army into Rome and declaring yourself the new boss. The result? A macabre game of musical chairs, where the chair was really a throne and the music was the sound of swords clashing. The stakes were high. If you weren't constantly watching your back, you'd end up as the latest entry on Rome's ever-expanding list of emperors who met untimely ends. According to the historian Suetonius, Julius Caesar's last words were an expression of betrayal, a fitting end for a leader who navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics for so long. And while Caligula may not have had any famous last words, his assassination was a brutal reminder that emperors often exited the scene feet first, whether through the blade, poison, or, if you were really unlucky, a disgruntled Praetorian Guard looking for a career change. Speaking of the Praetorian Guard, these guys were supposed to be the emperor's personal bodyguards. But as anyone who's watched a mob movie can tell you, sometimes your biggest threat is the guy standing right behind you. The guard had a nasty habit of playing kingmaker, often deciding who would be the next emperor by simply eliminating the current one. It was like having a security team that also doubled as your most dangerous enemy. A real catch-22 if there ever was one. The irony is that while emperors were supposed to wield absolute power, they often found themselves trapped in a web of political machinations and deadly intrigue. It's the kind of situation where you'd need eyes in the back of your head and a healthy dose of paranoia just to make it through dinner. Forget Game of Thrones. This was the real deal, and it was happening in the marble halls of Rome centuries before anyone ever thought of dragons or iron thrones. But don't get me wrong, the allure of being an emperor was powerful. The glory, the wealth, the ability to shape the future of entire nations. Who wouldn't want that kind of power? Yet the harsh reality was that the path to the throne was strewn with corpses, and the seat itself was often a death trap. The very things that made the position so desirable, control, influence, legacy, also made it a target for every ambitious senator, general, or disgruntled noble. So, the next time you picture yourself in a toga, remember that it might look cool. The job description comes with more than a few caveats. And if you ever find yourself wishing for a bit of ancient Roman glory, just remember, in the world of emperors, the only thing more dangerous than ambition was success itself. In this vicious cycle of power, betrayal was not just expected, it was guaranteed. Welcome to the world of Roman politics, where the only certainty was uncertainty, and the only rule was survival. Now that you've settled onto that throne, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of running the Roman Empire, where the real work begins. And trust me, it's not all gladiatorial games and orgies. No, my friend. Being a Roman emperor was like running the world's most complex, sprawling business, except your employees were armed to the teeth. and shareholders were liable to stab you in the back. First order of business, the Roman legions. You know, those infamous soldiers who marched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, painting the map Roman red. Keeping them fed and happy was not just a logistical nightmare, it was an economic black hole. Picture this. A single legion consisted of about 5,000 soldiers. Now multiply that by about 30 legions at the height of Rome's power. That's 150,000 mouths to feed, and that's before you count support staff, cavalry, and the ever-necessary camp followers. It's like catering a never-ending wedding banquet, except everyone's carrying a sword. So, what did all this cost? A lot. Take the soldier's salary, for example. An average legionary could expect to earn around 225 denarii a year in the 1st century AD, which might not sound like much today, but with inflation adjusted, it was a tidy sum back then. The empire's military budget looked like a black hole, sucking up roughly 60-70% of the state's annual expenses. To keep the troops from revolting, you had to pay them on time, or else you'd have a mutiny on your hands faster than you can say, Ave Caesar. Then there's the matter of feeding this army. A single soldier required about 3 pounds of grain each day, not to mention meat, olive oil, and wine. Because what's a Roman without his daily ration of vino? Now, times that by 150,000, and you're looking at a grain consumption that could feed a small nation. The empire had to import massive quantities from places like Egypt, the granary of Rome itself. Talk about your ancient supply chain management issues. But wait, there's more to maintain. Roads, aqueducts, and fortifications don't build themselves, and they don't come cheap. The Roman road network was the envy of the world, stretching over 250,000 miles, with about 50,000 miles paved. Julius Caesar himself contributed to this grand network, understanding that good roads were as crucial to Rome's military success as a sharp gladius. Infrastructure was the lifeblood of the empire, ensuring troops could move quickly and goods could flow freely, your ancient FedEx, if you will. And let's not forget the tax system that kept all this running, or at least tried to. Roman taxation was a curious beast, a mix of land taxes, poll taxes, and trade tariffs. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, was quite the accountant. He instituted a census to better assess and collect taxes, a move that was both savvy and necessary given the empire's sprawling expanse. It was Augustus who said, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble," but he might have added, "I also left it with a ledger balanced by the skin of its teeth." Of course, collecting taxes in such a vast empire was easier said than done. Tax collectors were often more corrupt than honest, pocketing a tidy sum before anything reached the imperial coffers. Think of them as the original creative accountants, except with fewer spreadsheets and more extortion. Failure to pay taxes could result in confiscation of property, imprisonment, or worse, being sent off to serve in the legions. Talk about incentivizing compliance. And then there's the matter of imperial largesse. The bread and circuses approach was a surefire way to keep the masses content. Free grain distributions and grand public spectacles like chariot races and gladiator games kept the city of Rome buzzing, and the people distracted from the less savory aspects of imperial life, like the fact that their emperor might not see out the year. Augustus was a master of this balancing act, understanding that while you can't buy loyalty, you can certainly rent it. Yet, despite all these efforts, the imperial treasury was often just a few bad harvests away from disaster. The allure of expansion was always tempered by the economic reality that new territories were costly to conquer, settle, and defend. The Grand Roman Empire was forever teetering on the brink of fiscal calamity, its emperors juggling the demands of war, infrastructure, and public appeasement with the skill of a circus performer attempting to keep a dozen plates spinning on sticks. This was the paradox of power. The more Rome grew, the more unwieldy it became. Each new province added to the empire's glory, but also to its burden, each victory celebrated with triumphal parades and costly sacrifices. Being an emperor was like being a gambler on a winning streak, each new hand more risky, each bet larger, and the stakes ever higher. In the ancient world, there were no bailouts, no benevolent bankers to plead with. If you ran the empire into the ground, you quite literally risked losing your head. As for the emperors themselves, they were the ultimate risk-takers, walking a tightrope of political intrigue, military might, and economic necessity. Whether you were Augustus, who deftly managed to turn a republic into a dynasty, or Nero, who allegedly fiddled while his city burned, every decision carried monumental weight. Their legacies were written not in marble, but in the blood, sweat, and tears of an empire that demanded everything of its rulers and offered precious little in return. Despite all the pomp and circumstance, the life of a Roman emperor was a relentless grind. It was an empire built on ambition and sustained by constant vigilance, a regime where the only certainty was that nothing was ever certain. But for those brave, or perhaps foolish enough, to sit upon the throne, the allure of absolute power was a siren song too tempting to resist. And so, the cycle continued, emperors rising and falling like the tides of the Tiber, each one hoping to leave a mark that would echo through eternity. So, as you sit there in your toga, contemplating the weight of the Roman world upon your shoulders, remember this. The glory of Rome was both a blessing and a curse. The empire's grandeur was matched only by the enormity of the challenges it faced. A perennial game of thrones where the stakes were life and death, and the only rule was survival at any cost. And yet, as if all those logistical headaches weren't enough, you're also expected to be the poster child for Roman virtue. Picture this. While you're juggling the empire's finances like an ancient Warren Buffett, there's another ball in the air. Public perception. Being a Roman emperor was like starring in the world's longest-running reality show, minus the confessional booth to vent your frustrations. Everyone from the senators to the slaves had an opinion on how you should conduct yourself, and the stakes were higher than a botched comment on social media. Roman virtue, virtus as they called it, wasn't just about being a nice guy. It was a checklist of qualities like courage, duty, and ironically, humility. As the emperor, you were supposed to embody these ideals, even if your day job was closer to that of a CEO with a penchant for dodging daggers. This virtuous image wasn't just for show. It was essential for maintaining your grip on power. Fail to reflect these ideals, and you'd find yourself the subject of the ancient world's equivalent of tabloid gossip. Yes, the Romans loved a good scandal as much as we do today. Who needs TMZ when you've got the forum and a penchant for public speaking? Let's talk about those lavish games at the Colosseum, shall we? Hosting these spectacles was less about your personal love for gladiators and more about keeping the public entertained and placated. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of hosting the Super Bowl, except with more lions and less halftime show. The Colosseum, completed in 80 AD, was a marvel of engineering, seating up to 80,000 roaring Romans. It was the ultimate stage for emperors to showcase their generosity and magnanimity, and boy, did it cost a pretty penny. The expense of these games could reach astronomical heights, with some emperors, like Trajan, reportedly hosting events with over 10,000 gladiators and wild animals. Numbers that make even the most extravagant modern concerts look like a backyard barbecue. Why go to such lengths? Because in Rome, public approval was your lifeline. The masses needed to be entertained, and if you could keep them cheering, you might just keep their knives at bay. Bread and circuses weren't just a catchy phrase, they were a survival strategy. The games were a way to demonstrate imperial might and distract the populace from more pressing issues, like the fact that the grain supply was a little less than certain, or that your predecessor met an untimely end under mysterious circumstances. But let's not forget the other side of the coin, the gossip mill. In ancient Rome, gossip was the original social media, and it spread just as fast. As emperor, your life was scrutinized more than politicians' tax returns. Every misstep, every whispered rumor, could snowball into a crisis. The Roman elite, much like today's tabloids, thrived on scandal. If you so much as sneezed in public, there'd be a senator ready to spin it into a tale of weakness or divine disfavor. And if you had the audacity to indulge in luxury, heaven forbid, well, that just got tongues wagging even faster. Take, for instance, the infamous Emperor Nero. Known for his artistic ambitions and alleged pyromania, Nero's reputation was the ancient equivalent of a celebrity meltdown. Did he really fiddle while Rome burned in 64 AD? Unlikely, considering the fiddle hadn't been invented yet. But the story stuck, thanks in part to rivals eager to paint him as a decadent tyrant. Nero's public image was a tapestry of truths, half-truths, and outright fabrications. His love for the arts was seen as effeminate, his lavish lifestyle as proof of his moral decay. The gossip was relentless, a reminder that in Rome, reputations were as fragile as papyrus in a rainstorm. Being the model of Roman virtue also meant adhering to a strict code of public conduct, one that demanded restraint even when the wine was flowing and the parties were in full swing. The Roman elite held tightly to the notion of gravitas, seriousness and dignity, a constant companion to all that virtus. The emperor was expected to lead by example, showing restraint in personal habits and fortitude in the face of adversity. It was a tall order, especially when surrounded by opulence and the constant temptation to indulge. The weight of expectation was immense, and even the strongest emperors could buckle under it. You were not just a ruler, you were Rome personified. Every decision, every action was a reflection of the state itself. Fail to live up to these ideals, and you risked not only your reputation, but also the stability of the empire. Your virtue was the glue holding the societal fabric together, and any sign of weakness was an invitation for your enemies to pounce. And then, of course, there were the public appearances. As emperor, you were expected to be visible, to show yourself to the people, and remind them why they should continue to support you. These weren't just casual strolls through the forum. They were carefully orchestrated spectacles, designed to showcase strength and benevolence. The Roman populace loved a good procession, and emperors obliged, parading through the streets with all the pomp and circumstance of a modern-day royal wedding. But behind the smiles and waves was a constant undercurrent of tension, an awareness that each appearance was a test of your popularity and political acumen. Public expectations weren't limited to just the games or appearances, either. The emperor was also expected to act as a patron of the arts and architecture, leaving behind a legacy of public works that would endure through the ages. Augustus famously boasted that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. It wasn't just about beautifying the city. It was about creating a lasting testament to your reign, a physical manifestation of your greatness. These projects were as much about legacy building as they were about practical improvements, a way to ensure your name lived on long after you were gone. The stakes of public life were sky high, and the pressure to conform to Roman ideals was unrelenting. The emperor was a living embodiment of the state, a symbol of its power and stability. Any hint of scandal, any failure to live up to these lofty standards, could be catastrophic. It was a life lived under the microscope, where every action was scrutinized, and every word dissected. In the world of Roman politics, perception was reality, and managing that perception was an emperor's full-time job. So, while the idea of sitting on Rome's imperial throne might sound appealing, remember that it came with strings attached, strings that could easily turn into nooses if you weren't careful. The life of a Roman emperor was a constant balancing act, a high-wire performance where the audience was always eager for a misstep. Public life in ancient Rome wasn't just a game of thrones. It was a game of survival, where the only certainty was that the spotlight was never far away, and the shadows were filled with those eager to see you fall. In the end, the allure of power was matched only by its peril. To be the face of Roman virtue was to walk a tightrope stretched over a pit of vipers, with every misstep threatening not just your own demise, but the unraveling of the entire empire. And yet, despite the dangers, the emperors persisted, driven by ambition, legacy, and the hope that their names would echo through history. In the grand theatre of Roman life, they were the leading actors, playing their parts for an audience that was always watching, always judging, and always hungry for more. Life as a Roman emperor was like starring in an endless thriller, where the plot twist always involved a knife at your back. As if juggling the empire's finances and public image wasn't enough, there was the ever-present spectre of rebellion and assassination. In the cutthroat world of Roman politics, your best friend today might very well be the one orchestrating your downfall tomorrow. Forget about leaving your enemies in the dust. More often than not, you'd find them at your dinner table, sharpening their cutlery. Take Nero, for instance. This guy couldn't even enjoy a musical recital without worrying that the audience might turn into a mob. Nero's reign, from 54 to 68 AD, was a masterclass in paranoia. Sure, he had his moments of artistic flair, but underneath was a ruler perpetually looking over his shoulder. The infamous Pisonian conspiracy of 65 AD was a testament to this. It wasn't just a whispering campaign. It was a full-blown plot involving senators, equestrians, and even his own guards. The plan: to replace him with Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a senator with a chip on his shoulder and aspirations of grandeur. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for the conspirators. Nero's response was swift and brutal: executions, forced suicides, and a wave of terror that only deepened his paranoia. It was like a Shakespearean tragedy, minus the poetic speeches, and with a lot more screaming. But if you thought Nero had it bad, let's talk about Domitian. Reigning from 81 to 96 AD, he was the kind of ruler who made paranoia an art form. Domitian took the concept of a trust fall and turned it into a death wish. He was convinced that everyone from the senators to the household staff was out to get him. And honestly, he wasn't entirely wrong. His reign was peppered with purges and paranoia, culminating in his assassination by a group that included his own chamberlain. Talk about a bad day at the office. The constant threat of betrayal wasn't just the stuff of nightmares. It was everyday reality. The Roman Senate, that august body of noble statesmen, was less a council of wise elders and more a nest of vipers. These guys made Machiavelli look like an amateur. For an emperor, the Senate was simultaneously a political tool and a potential death trap. You had to keep them close enough to control, but not so close that they could twist the knife. It was like playing chess with opponents who'd happily set the board on fire if it meant they could claim victory. This atmosphere of distrust wasn't just confined to the political elite. The Praetorian Guard, those supposed protectors of the emperor, were often more mercenary than military. These were the guys who could make or break an emperor's reign, and they knew it. Their loyalty was as stable as a sandcastle in a storm, pretty to look at, but liable to collapse at any moment. The Guard's influence was a double-edged sword. They protected emperors, sure, but they also had a nasty habit of deposing them when the price was right. Think of them as the original corporate raiders, only with more swords and fewer spreadsheets. Economics played a role too. Running an empire was expensive, and money was as much a weapon as any gladius. Nero's debasement of the currency to fund his lavish lifestyle and public works was a gamble that didn't pay off. Inflation soared, and with it, public discontent. An empty treasury was an invitation to revolt, and emperors who couldn't balance the books often found themselves balancing on the edge of a blade. Domitian learned this the hard way, trying to stabilize the economy with taxes and reforms, but ultimately succumbing to the very instability he sought to control. The social context was just as perilous. Rome's population was a melting pot of cultures and classes, each with its own grievances and ambitions. Keeping the peace was like managing a party where everyone had a grievance and a weapon. The urban poor needed grain and games to keep them placated, while the provinces demanded protection and fair taxation. An emperor had to be a master of diplomacy, a juggler of competing demands. It was a high-stakes game where losing meant not just political embarrassment, but possibly your head on a pike. And let's not forget the allure of the imperial title itself. Power was the ultimate aphrodisiac, and the Roman Empire was the biggest stage on which to flaunt it. Every ambitious senator, general, or aristocrat saw the emperor's position as the ultimate prize, a crown jewel that justified any means to obtain it. The result was a perpetual cycle of ambition and betrayal, where the throne was both a symbol of ultimate authority and an invitation to disaster. The irony, of course, is that the very things that made being an emperor so seductive, power, influence, legacy, also made it a target. The more successful you were, the more you had to lose, and the more enemies you made. It was a vicious cycle, a never-ending dance of power and paranoia, where the only certainty was that someone, somewhere, was plotting your downfall. In this treacherous landscape, emperors were forced to become masters of intrigue, navigating a world where alliances were as fleeting as the summer breeze, and betrayal was just another day at the office. Theirs was a reality where trust was a luxury few could afford, and vigilance was the only defense against a world that was as dangerous as it was captivating. So, as you sit there contemplating the glories of ruling an empire, remember that being a Roman emperor was less about glory and more about survival. It was a life lived on the edge, a constant battle against the forces of ambition and betrayal. And while the allure of power was undeniable, the price was steep, and the cost could be counted in blood and treachery. In the end, the throne was a prize that came with chains, and the only certainty was that the game would continue, with new players stepping into the spotlight, ready to risk it all for a taste of imperial glory. So, here we are, on the other side of that imperial curtain, staring out at the grand tableau of Roman history. From Augustus, the original poster boy for imperial grandeur, to Romulus Augustulus, the teenager who had the dubious honor of being Rome's last emperor, we've seen a parade of rulers who, despite the shiny title and fancy headgear, often found themselves in a political meat grinder. It's a dizzying legacy, one that prompts the inevitable question: was it worth it? Augustus, the man who took Rome from a republic to an empire, really knew how to set the bar high. He ruled from 27 BC to AD 14, a remarkable 41 years, which is like running a marathon in lead shoes when you consider the average emperor clocked out after just a few years. Augustus was a master of propaganda, spinning his image as the benevolent father of the nation while cleverly sidelining those pesky senators who preferred the status quo. Augustus had the Roman equivalent of spin doctors, ensuring that his name would be etched in the annals of history as the guy who brought peace. Pax Romana, they called it. But let's not ignore the fine print. This peace was often hammered out with the blunt end of a gladius. Fast forward to Romulus Augustulus, the kid who was thrust onto the throne at just 12 years old in 475 AD, reigning for a mere year before being deposed by Odoacer, a barbarian chieftain with an eye for real estate. Romulus's reign was less about ruling and more about being the historical equivalent of a placeholder. His legacy? Well, he's often remembered as a footnote, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Talk about a tough act to follow, or rather, a tough act to precede, considering there wasn't much of an empire left to lead by the time he donned the purple. Between Augustus and Romulus, the Roman Empire had its share of characters, each adding their own chapter to the imperial saga. Tiberius, who loathed the spotlight so much he practically ghosted the city, retreating to Capri to play the ancient version of Off the Grid. Or Hadrian, who was less about expansion and more about fortifying what he had, famously building a wall across Britain to keep out the notoriously pesky Picts. And then there was Constantine, the emperor who saw a vision of the cross and decided it might be time to legalize Christianity, forever altering the religious landscape of the empire. But let's not kid ourselves. The allure of being emperor wasn't just about shaping history. It was about power, raw, unadulterated power. The kind that could make or break legacies with a flick of the wrist. It was intoxicating, sure, but also incredibly volatile, like holding a handful of fireworks with a lit match. For every Augustus who managed to balance the scales, there was a Nero or a Caligula who found themselves consumed by the very flames they sought to control. The legacy of the Roman emperors is a complex tapestry, woven from threads of ambition, betrayal, and the occasional bout of insanity. They were icons of their time, tasked with the impossible job of keeping an empire together while standing on a foundation as stable as a plate of jello. Yet their stories continue to captivate us, a testament to the enduring allure of power and the timeless drama of human ambition. It's no coincidence that the tales of Rome and its emperors continue to inspire everything from Shakespearean tragedy to binge-worthy TV dramas. There's something irresistible about the blend of grandeur and doom, the heady cocktail of power and peril. So, was it worth it? If you asked Augustus, he might have pointed to the city he transformed and the peace he brokered, albeit with a nod to the inevitable bloodshed that accompanied it. Romulus Augustulus might have been less enthusiastic, given his brief stint in the heart seat. And yet, despite the power struggles, the betrayals, and the often grisly ends, the allure of being a Roman emperor was a siren song that continued to draw ambitious souls to its rocky shores. In the end, the legacy of the Roman emperors is a reminder of both our greatest potential and our deepest flaws. It's a story of ambition unchecked, of power pursued at any cost, and of the eternal dance between aspiration and reality. Their reigns were a microcosm of the human condition, a testament to the timeless allure of power and the inevitable pitfalls that accompany it. As we look back on the grand tapestry of Roman history, it's clear that while the throne might have promised glory, it also demanded a heavy price, a price that, more often than not, was paid in blood and tears. And yet, here's the kicker. Despite knowing all of this, the allure of power continues to captivate us. We are as drawn to the tales of emperors and their exploits as a moth is to a flame. Perhaps it's because, in their stories, we see reflections of our own desires, our own aspirations for greatness. We are fascinated by the spectacle of it all, the grand theatre of human ambition played out on the world's largest stage. In the chronicles of Rome, we find both cautionary tales and the intoxicating promise of what might be. It's a dance as old as time, and one that continues to play out in the corridors of power today. So, next time you find yourself daydreaming about donning the imperial purple, remember the lessons of those who came before. The crown may glitter, but it's just as likely to weigh you down. The allure of power is undeniable, but so too are its dangers. In the end, the legacy of the Roman emperors is a testament to the complex, often contradictory nature of human ambition, a reminder that while we may reach for the stars, we must also watch our step, lest we find ourselves tumbling back down to earth. The chill in the air has a certain bite, sharper than the blade of a Celtic sword, as you stand on the edge of the Iron Age world. It's the 1st century BCE, and you're smack dab in the middle of Celtic Europe, a place where the landscape is as rugged as the people. The Romans, with their insatiable appetite for conquest, have started casting their eyes over these lands like a hawk sizing up a rabbit. But don't worry just yet, because the Celts, your people, are anything but easy prey. Let's start with who you are amidst these hills and forests. You're part of a decentralized society, which is a fancy way of saying there's no single boss calling all the shots. Instead, power is shared among tribes, each led by its own chieftain. And these aren't your run-of-the-mill tribes. We're talking hundreds of them, scattered across what's now modern-day France, Germany, the British Isles, and beyond. Imagine managing a team this vast without a single email or conference call. It's an organizational nightmare, but somehow it works. Now, if there's one thing you Celts love more than your freedom, it's a good feast. You know how to throw a party that would make even the most decadent Roman banquet look like a dull board meeting. These aren't just meals. They're social events where alliances are forged, disputes are settled, and stories as long as the winter nights are told. Think of it as the ancient version of networking, but with more mead and fewer business cards. But let's get serious for a moment. The Romans are coming, and they bring with them roads, aqueducts, and a military machine that's a marvel of its time. So how do you and your Celtic kin plan to survive this juggernaut? Enter geography, your secret weapon. The Romans may have their legions, but you've got the land on your side. Hill forts dart the landscape, strategically positioned to take full advantage of natural defenses. These aren't just any forts. They're the ancient world's equivalent of no trespassing signs, built with enough fortification to make any would-be invader think twice. And if they do get too close, well, let's just say they'll have a warm Celtic welcome waiting for them. Speaking of warm welcomes, let's address the myth of those blue-painted warriors. You've probably heard tales of fierce Celtic fighters charging into battle, covered head to toe in woad, a blue dye that would make any modern tattoo artist green with envy. While it's true that some warriors did use woad, it wasn't just for style points. There's a practical side to this bold-fashioned statement. Woad contains antiseptic properties, which means it helps with wounds, not just striking fear into the heart of the enemy. Now, let's talk about what really sets you Celts apart, your ironworking skills. You're not just swinging any old sword, you're wielding a weapon crafted with precision and skill that rivals any Roman gladius. Iron is the lifeblood of Celtic society, used for everything from tools to weapons. In fact, the Celts were so good at this iron game that even the Romans had to admit it, often adopting Celtic techniques for their own purposes. If there's one thing a Roman hates, it's admitting the superiority of a barbarian, but the evidence was undeniable. But let's not get too carried away with romanticizing the warrior life. The reality is, life in Celtic Europe is no walk in the park. It's tough, unpredictable, and governed by the whims of nature as much as by the decisions of chieftains. The Romans are a looming threat, but so are rival tribes, disease, and the ever-present challenge of survival in a world without modern conveniences. Yet, despite all this, the Celts endure, resilient and adaptable. As you stand there, the wind rustling through the trees, it's hard not to feel a sense of pride and defiance. You are part of a tapestry woven with tradition, skill, and a touch of rebellion. The Romans may be knocking, but with your wits, your geography, and your iron, you're more than ready to show them that Celtic Europe isn't just a land to be conquered, it's a force to be reckoned with. And that, my friend, is the spirit that will carry you through the trials to come. As you stand there, the wind rustling through the trees, it's hard not to feel a sense of pride and defiance. The Romans are persistent, and they're heading north with the determination of a marathon runner who missed the memo that the race ended 3 days ago. But before you start shaking in your woad-painted boots, let's talk about what makes these Roman legions such a formidable force. Roman military might is a well-oiled machine, or as close to one as you can get in a world without WD-40. Their legions are organized with the precision of a Swiss watch, if that watch were also capable of stabbing you with a gladius. Each legion is made up of about 5,000 soldiers, the kind who march in lockstep with their shields raised, forming a human tank that rolls over enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. It's the phalanx on steroids, and it's enough to make anyone rethink their life choices. Now, here's the bit where we shatter some illusions. The Romans aren't just about brute strength and shiny helmets. Their secret weapon is discipline, honed by years of training and a strict hierarchy that makes a corporate ladder look like a jungle gym. These soldiers aren't just picking up a sword for the weekend. They're professionals with a career in conquest, and they're backed by an empire willing to pour serious cash into their campaigns. We're talking about an economy that, at its peak, could muster resources equivalent to billions of today's dollars. It's like having Jeff Bezos bankroll your world domination tour. But every machine has its vulnerabilities, and for Rome, it's logistics. Keeping thousands of soldiers fed, equipped, and motivated across the rainy, rugged terrain of Britannia is no small feat. The Roman supply line stretches like a piece of gum that's been chewed on for too long. It works, but it's fragile. This is where the Celts come in with their guerrilla tactics, turning the landscape into their ally. While the Romans march in neat lines, you and your fellow Celts hide in the shadows, using the forests as your cloak and the hills as your shield. Hit-and-run tactics become your best friend as you harass the invaders and vanish before they can retaliate. It's like playing hide-and-seek with a bear. You can't win head-on, but you can sure make it regret leaving its cave. Let's not forget the economic strain this creates for Rome. Each legion costs a fortune to maintain, from the soldiers' salaries to the fancy sandals they stomp around in. And when you're operating in hostile territory, every mile away from home base is a mile that costs you more in gold, grain, and manpower. It's enough to make even the most ambitious general question whether subduing a bunch of tribes with a penchant for partying and painting themselves blue is worth the expense. This is where the Celts' network of alliances comes into play. Picture a web of tribes, each with its own interests, but united by a common enemy with a tendency to build roads everywhere they go. The Celts aren't just about brute force. They know how to play the political game. When two Roman generals have a spat over who gets to claim victory, the Celts are there to fan the flames, quietly orchestrating chaos from the sidelines. It's a bit like watching two rival CEOs squabble over a merger while you quietly buy up their stocks. The Celts excel at turning Roman ambition into Roman discord, a savvy move that often results in the invaders doing their dirty work for them. Of course, none of this is to say that the Celts have it easy. Life on the front lines is tough, and the constant threat of Roman reprisal means that every decision carries weight. But there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that even the mighty Roman legions can be outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and ultimately frustrated by a people who refuse to be conquered. It's the classic tale of David and Goliath, only this time David's got a network of allies and a penchant for guerrilla warfare. So as you stand there, on the edge of this ancient conflict, remember that while the Romans may have their legions, their roads, and their insatiable hunger for expansion, you have something they can't easily replicate. The heart of a people who understand that freedom is worth fighting for, even when the odds seem insurmountable. And that, my friend, is a story as enduring as the hills themselves. Speaking of stories as enduring as those ancient hills, let's dive into the cultural clash that makes this whole Roman Celtic saga a bit like a Game of Thrones episode, only with fewer dragons and more druids. You see, while the Romans were busy trying to stamp their empire's insignia everywhere they went, the Celts were crafting a different kind of legacy, one woven into the very fabric of their social life. Imagine a scene right out of a medieval pub. bards strumming their lyres, a storyteller spinning tales that dance through the air like embers from a fire, and druids, those enigmatic priestly figures, whispering truths as old as the oak trees they revered. This social tapestry wasn't just for show. It was a living, breathing form of resilience and resistance. While the Romans, with their togas and laurels, spun yarns about civilizing the savages, the Celts had already written their own narrative, one that didn't require chiseling into stone. Now, let's talk bards. These aren't your average wandering minstrels. In Celtic society, a bard was more than just a singer. They were a historian, a keeper of lore, a walking, talking Google search bar. They'd belt out epic sagas that started with once upon a time and ended with, and that's why you don't mess with the Celts. Their songs and stories served as cultural glue, binding tribes together with shared history and values. And let's be real, there's nothing like a rousing tale of heroism to lift spirits after a long day of dodging Roman patrols. Then we have the Druids, cloaked in mystery and often misunderstood. Thanks to Roman propaganda, they've been painted as everything from wise sages to bloodthirsty cult leaders. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. Druids were the intellectual elite of the Celtic world, the philosophers and scientists of their time. They were advisors to kings, teachers of young minds, and mediators of peace. Their oral teachings, passed down through generations, were a form of cultural continuity that even the mightiest Roman legion couldn't extinguish. But here's where things get really interesting. The Celts weren't just resisting Romanization, they were remixing it. Picture this, a Celtic warrior in full battle gear, but with a Roman gladius tucked into his belt, or a Celtic chieftain sipping imported Roman wine at a feast, a luxury that came with a side of irony. The Celts were savvy traders who knew how to turn Roman goods into status symbols. This wasn't just about adopting foreign trinkets, it was about subverting them, about using the empire's own tools to reinforce Celtic identity. This brings us to the myth of the noble savage, a trope that paints the Celts as primitive but pure-hearted warriors living in idyllic harmony with nature. While it's a lovely image, it glosses over the complexities of Celtic society. They were, in fact, sharp political players and skilled negotiators. They knew when to fight, when to trade, and when to play the long game. The Romans might have seen them as barbarians, but the truth is, the Celts were masters of adapting to changing circumstances without losing sight of who they were. Economically, this adaptability was critical. The Celtic tribes, while decentralized, weren't isolated. They traded extensively across Europe, dealing in everything from salt and tin to cattle and textiles. Their economy wasn't just a marketplace. It was a network that connected disparate tribes and fostered mutual dependence. Even in the face of Roman encroachment, this network proved resilient, a testament to the Celts' ability to innovate and collaborate. And speaking of innovation, let's not forget their artistic flair. The Celts were artisans par excellence, known for their intricate metalwork, vibrant textiles, and swirling, dynamic designs that seemed to defy the static nature of the medium. These weren't just pretty objects. They were statements of identity and defiance. When a Celt wore a torque, a neck ring of twisted metal, it wasn't just jewelry. It was a badge of honor, a declaration of belonging to a tribe that valued creativity as much as it did courage. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life in Celtic lands wasn't all feasts and festivals. It was a constant balancing act, a tightrope walk between maintaining cultural integrity and adapting to new realities. The threat of Roman invasion was ever present, a reminder that the world could change at a moment's notice. Yet through it all, the Celts held onto their stories, their songs, and their sense of self, even as the world around them shifted like the sands of time. So here we are, standing at the crossroads of history, where the clash of cultures is more than just a battle of swords and shields. It's a struggle for identity, for the right to define one's own narrative in the face of an empire that wanted to rewrite it. And in this struggle, the Celts proved that sometimes the pen, or in this case, the spoken word, truly is mightier than the sword. As we continue this journey, remember that the heart of Celtic resistance wasn't just in their iron and might, but in their stories and songs, their ability to turn the tide of history with nothing more than a tale well told. Ah, the Celts and their knack for turning the tide of history with a tale well told, but let's not get caught in the lyrical fog just yet. Time to plunge into the gritty arena of Roman Celtic politics, where the stakes were higher than a druid's oak tree, and the players just as gnarled. Enter Queen Boudica, the fiery-haired warrior queen whose name still echoes through the annals of rebellion. Picture her not as a mere figurehead, but as a woman with a grudge and a strategy. She hailed from the Iceni tribe in what we now call East Anglia, and her story is a testament to the brutal reality of Rome's imperial ambitions. You see, when her husband, King Prasutagus, died around 60 AD, he left his kingdom jointly to his daughters and the Roman emperor. A neat plan in theory, but the Romans, as subtle as a marching legion, disregarded his will completely. They annexed the kingdom, flogged Boudica, and violated her daughters, an act that sparked a revolt fiercer than a Celtic bonfire. Boudica, now an avenging force, rallied a coalition of tribes, her chariot wheels cutting through the landscape like a hot knife through butter. She wasn't just fighting for her family's honor, but for the independence of a people tired of Roman taxes and their holier-than-thou attitudes. Her uprising gathered an army reportedly numbering around 100,000, a testament to her charisma and the widespread resentment against Roman rule. They torched the Roman settlements of Camulaginum, modern-day Colchester, Londinium, that's London to you, and Verulamium, now St. Albans, leaving a trail of destruction that would make any Roman general reach for his strongest wine. But as much as we admire a good underdog story, let's not romanticize Boudica's campaign into a Celtic fairy tale. The rebellion was brutal, with casualties soaring on both sides. Tacitus, the Roman historian, rather gleefully reports that about 70,000 Romans and Romanized Britons met their end at the hands of Boudica's forces. Yet, a rebellion couldn't withstand Roman tactics forever. The Romans, led by Governor Suetonius Paulinus, regrouped and retaliated with a methodical precision that was their calling card. The battle, likely fought at a location still debated by historians, resulted in a decisive Roman victory. Boudica's fate is shrouded in mystery. She either took poison to avoid capture or succumbed to illness. So, while Boudica's story is often cloaked in the myth of indomitable Celtic spirit, it's also a stark reminder of how internal divisions and lack of resources can turn the tide against even the fiercest resistance. The Roman Empire was nothing if not persistent, and their ability to exploit Celtic disunity was as sharp as any gladius. Speaking of disunity, let's wade into the murky waters of Celtic tribal politics. Unity among the Celts was about as reliable as British weather. A sunny day could turn into a downpour without warning. The Celts were a patchwork of tribes, each with its own leaders, customs, and grudges, making alliances as fragile as a Roman pottery shard. The Romans, ever the opportunists, played these divisions to their advantage, offering treaties to some tribes while crushing others. It's a classic case of divide and conquer, a strategy as old as time and as effective as Roman engineering. Take, for example, the cunning diplomacy of the Atrebates, a tribe that cozied up to Rome faster than you can say Amicitia. Led by King Camillus, they were one of the first to recognize the benefits of aligning with the invaders, gaining Roman protection in exchange for their loyalty. Camillus himself was a former ally of Julius Caesar, which might explain his tribe's willingness to play ball with the empire. The Atrebates' strategic marriages and alliances with other tribes helped them maintain a semblance of peace and prosperity, even as the Roman shadow loomed large. Yet this political chess game wasn't without its betrayals. Tribal leaders who once shared a mead cup could find themselves on opposite sides, lured by Roman promises of power or simply forced by circumstance. The Trinovantes, for instance, were initially allies of the Caruvelorni, a powerful tribe in southeastern Britain. But when the Caruvelorni began to dominate, the Trinovantes switched sides, supporting Rome in exchange for autonomy. It's the kind of backstabbing that would make even a soap opera writer blush. In this environment, strategic marriages were the glue that sometimes held alliances together. Marriages between tribes were more than just romantic unions. They were political contracts, binding agreements meant to secure peace or consolidate power. A chieftain's daughter might find herself wed to the son of a neighboring tribe's leader, a human bridge over troubled waters. Of course, these arrangements were as stable as the alliances they represented, which is to say, not very. So, here we stand, amidst a game of thrones where the stakes are land, power, and survival. The Celts may not have had a centralized government, but they were adept politicians, navigating a world where allegiances shifted like sands in the wind. The Romans, with their penchant for diplomacy backed by military might, were formidable opponents. They understood that conquering the Celts required more than brute force. It required understanding the cultural and political landscape and exploiting it to their advantage. Yet, for all their strategic marriages and alliances, the Celts faced an uphill battle. The harsh reality was that Rome's might was backed by an economy as vast as their empire, with resources and manpower seemingly limitless. The Celts, for all their bravery and resilience, were often outnumbered and outgunned. Their survival depended on their ability to adapt, to forge new alliances, and to resist where possible. As we close this chapter of our journey through Celtic resistance, remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry of grey, woven with threads of heroism, betrayal, and the harsh realities of survival in a world dominated by empire. And while the Celts may not have always emerged victorious, their story is one of resilience and adaptability, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people determined to carve their own path, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Stay tuned as we explore the next twist in this epic saga, where the stakes get even higher and the game becomes more complex than ever before. And so, the curtain fell on the last act of Celtic defiance, but as they say in the theatre, the show must go on. Enter the post-conquest era, a time when the Romans, having planted their flag in Celtic lands, set about the task of Romanization with all the subtlety of a marching legion. Yet, the Celts, with their knack for subverting expectations, were far from bit players in this unfolding drama. Let's be clear. Romanization wasn't some magical wave of a wand that turned every Celt into a toga-wearing Roman overnight. It was a process, one that played out over centuries, with all the complexity of a Shakespearean subplot. The Romans were experts at integrating conquered peoples, offering the carrot of citizenship and the stick of military might. But the Celts weren't about to hand over their identity like a coat at the door. Instead, they engaged in a cultural tango, borrowing elements of Roman life while clinging to their own traditions. Take, for instance, the Roman towns that began to dart the landscape, places like Londinium, which, despite its Latin name, bore the unmistakable marks of Celtic influence. The Celts took to urban life with surprising enthusiasm, yet they didn't trade in their tribal structures for Roman bureaucracy wholesale. Instead, these towns became melting pots where Celtic and Roman customs mingled like whiskey and water. Archaeological digs in places like Verulamium have unearthed Roman-style houses with Celtic-style decorations, a literal blending of worlds under one roof. Then there's the matter of religion. The Romans, pragmatic to their core, often assimilated local deities into their own pantheon, a sort of divine remixing. The Celts, with their deep reverence for nature and the mystical, saw their gods reimagined as Roman counterparts. But don't be fooled, this wasn't a one-way street. Celtic spiritual practices influenced Roman religious life, too. Temples dedicated to hybrid gods began to appear, places where Jupiter might share space with Tyrannes, a Celtic god of thunder. It's a testament to the Celts' ability to adapt without losing their spiritual roots, a lesson in resilience that echoes through time. Now, let's talk legacy. The Celts' enduring cultural footprint is as much about what we find beneath the soil as it is about what survives in our collective imagination. Archaeologists have unearthed a treasure trove of artifacts that tell the tale of a people who were both proud warriors and skilled artisans. From the intricate designs of the Battersea shield to the swirling patterns of the great torque from Snettisham, these objects speak to a society that valued beauty and craftsmanship as much as it did valor. But here's where we get into the myth-busting. The romantic notion of the Celts as noble savages, untouched by the trappings of civilization, is a tale as tall as a druid's staff. The truth is far more nuanced. The Celts were part of a vast trade network that spanned Europe, dealing in everything from salt to slaves. They weren't isolated tribes living in idyllic harmony with nature. They were savvy traders and shrewd negotiators. The archaeological record reveals a society that was as complex and interconnected as any in the ancient world. And yet, for all their adaptability, the Celts have been both romanticized and misunderstood through history. The 19th century Celtic revival painted them as symbols of pure, untainted culture, a reaction to the industrialization sweeping Europe at the time. but this romantic veneer often glossed over the gritty realities of Celtic life. The Celts were no strangers to conflict and conquest. They were a people who thrived on change, who adapted and endured in a world that was anything but static. So, what can we learn from the Celts today? Perhaps it's this. History isn't just about who holds the power or who builds the biggest empire. It's about who perseveres, who adapts in the face of change, and who retains their sense of self even when the world shifts around them. The Celts remind us that resilience and adaptability are just as important as military might and political power. In a world that often measures success by material wealth, the Celts teach us the value of cultural richness and the enduring power of identity. As we wrap up our journey through the Celtic world, take a moment to consider the legacy they've left behind. It's a story of survival against the odds, of a people who, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, managed to leave an indelible mark on history. In the end, their legacy is not just in the artifacts and ruins they left behind, but in the stories we've inherited, stories that remind us of the strength found in unity and the power of a culture that refuses to be forgotten. So here's to the Celts, those enigmatic warriors and artisans, those traders and storytellers who, in their own way, shaped the course of history. As you lay your head down tonight, let the echoes of their tales lull you to sleep, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are those that don't make the headlines, but instead play out quietly over the course of centuries. In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, where marble statues stood like silent gossipers in the piazzas and senators strutted around in their pristine togas, there existed a peculiar breed of individuals known as gladiator trainers. Now, to some, the idea of training gladiators might sound like a role with the glamour of a Hollywood action film, all muscles and might. But for these trainers, it was more of a delicate dance on the edge of a financial and social blade. Let's start with the essentials. The gladiator games were the ultimate ancient spectacle, akin to the Super Bowl with a side of bloodlust. From humble beginnings in 264 BCE, when they were just a quaint little offering at funerals, they morphed into full-blown events by the time of the Flavian Amphitheater, or what we romantically call the Colosseum. The empire hosted these games as a means of appeasing the masses, clever distraction from the complexities of Roman politics. Give them bread and circuses, as the poet Juvenal famously quipped, highlighting the Roman approach to governance. And the man behind the curtain, pulling the strings, that would be the Lannister, the gladiator trainer. Now, being a Lannister wasn't all wine and roses. Sure, on the surface, they might have seemed like influential figures. They had to manage ludus, or gladiatorial schools, juggling the roles of coach, manager, and sometimes even talent scout. They were responsible for turning slaves, prisoners of war, and the occasional free man with a death wish into crowd-pleasing combatants. But here's the rub. The job was a high-stakes gamble. Given the costs involved, Dynasty had to be part economist, part psychologist, and a whole lot of showman. Consider the investment. Buying a slave or a prisoner of war could set a trainer back anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 sesterces, that's before factoring in the daily costs of food, training gear, and medical care. In today's terms, it was like investing in a sports car that might crash spectacularly at its first race. Trainers had to ensure their recruits didn't just survive but thrived, turning them into profitable performers. And if they failed, it was their reputation and livelihood on the line. Socially, the Lannister occupied a strange niche, were crucial to one of Rome's favorite pastimes, but were often viewed with a mix of awe and disdain. While they mingled with the elite, like emperors and senators who sponsored games, they were also seen as profiteers of human misery. The high-stakes nature of their business meant they were caught in a constant tango with their wealthy patrons. These patrons expected a good show, nothing less than a spectacle, and if a trainer couldn't deliver, there were always others waiting in the wings, eager to impress. Now, let's not romanticize this as a simple tale of grit and glory. The reality was often brutal. The Lannister had to be a shrewd negotiator, always ready to haggle for the best price for their gladiators' appearances. The stakes were high. A successful gladiator could bring in substantial earnings, not to mention the chance to earn their freedom. However, a string of losses could collapse a trainer's business faster than the fall of a poorly constructed amphitheater. And speaking of collapses, let's talk about the hazards of the job. Trainers often dealt with the aftermath of fierce battles, and no, we're not talking about the drama of arena politics, but the literal aftermath of bloodied and broken bodies. Dynasty had to be part physician, tending to wounds with the limited medical knowledge of their time, which was less Hippocratic and more shake it off and get back in there. In the colorful tapestry of Roman society, the role of a gladiator trainer was one of constant navigation. They had to balance the expectations of their fighters, who were often a motley crew with little to lose, against the demands of patrons eager for more blood and glory. All the while, they lived under the shadow of the Roman social hierarchy, where the line between respect and contempt was as thin as a gladiator's sword. So, next time you're tempted to think of Rome's gladiatorial games as a glorious spectacle, spare a thought for the Dynasty. They were the unsung heroes, or perhaps the unsung villains, of the arena, forever playing a dangerous game where their fortunes were tied to the edge of a blade. As you can see, being a gladiator trainer was not for the faint-hearted or the financially faint. It was a world where fortunes could be made and lost in the time it took a crowd to roar and a sword to strike. Let's peel back the layers of the gladiatorial onion, shall we? Dive deep into the nitty-gritty of a Lannister's daily grind, and you'll find it's no walk in the Colosseum. Picture a job where waking up every morning means preparing a ragtag bunch of fighters for a life and death dance. Forget the romanticized image of noble warriors honing their skills with a samurai-like zen. Reality was more akin to running a boot camp with a side of medieval ER. Training regimens for these gladiators were as precise as they were punishing. You see, the Lannister had to transform their recruits from bedraggled captives into the Roman version of action figures. This meant rigorous exercise routines that would make even modern fitness fanatics wince. Every day, gladiators were put through their paces with a hearty mix of weightlifting, endurance drills, and combat practice. Think CrossFit, but with swords. Their diet was no less regimented, designed to turn sinew into steel. Gladiators were often referred to as horderii, or barley men, due to their carbohydrate-heavy meals. Barley was their bread and butter, literally, along with beans and a mysterious concoction known as pasca, a vinegar-based drink that was all the rage in the ranks of Roman soldiers. Protein, not so much. Meat was scarce and saved for special occasions, a far cry from the paleo dreams of a protein-rich, carnivorous lifestyle. Yet, despite these Spartan meals, the diet was crafted to build bulk, not unlike today's carb-loading athletes preparing for a marathon. Training equipment was as varied as it was lethal. Wooden swords for practice, weighted shields for strength, and even straw dummies to practice lethal strikes. But let's not forget the real stars of the show, the gladiators themselves. They were the ultimate test dummies, trained to perfect their killing technique while trying not to become victim to it. This was no dress rehearsal. Every sparring session carried the risk of injury, a busted knee or fractured skull, just another day at the office. And speaking of injuries, the Lannister had to play the role of a makeshift medic. Forget your modern sports physios and high-tech medical teams. Treatment was as much trial and error as it was actual science. A poultice here, some leeches there, and a lot of hope that the guards favored your fighter over the next. It was a rough, rudimentary affair, where the healing process was often about as forgiving as the arena itself. Now, let's tackle the myth of gladiators as highly skilled warriors. Sure, some were bona fide fighters, seasoned soldiers who knew their way around a battlefield, but many were just unfortunate souls thrust into a spotlight they never asked for. Prisoners of war, slaves, and criminals were the usual suspects, handed a weapon and a crash course in combat. The reality was that for every Spartacus, there were hundreds of nameless men who fought not for glory, but for survival. The Lannisters' task was to mold these disparate figures into a cohesive fighting force, all while managing the expectations of their patrons and the baying crowds. It was a balancing act that required not just physical prowess, but psychological insight. Imagine being a therapist to a group of men with nothing to lose, a daunting task, to say the least. Economically, the stakes were high. A trainer's reputation, and by extension, their livelihood, hung on the performance of their gladiators. A single defeat could mean financial ruin, while a string of victories could elevate a Lannister to near-celebrity status. But the costs of maintaining a ludus were steep, and with gladiators dropping like flies, trainers had to constantly scout for fresh meat to throw into the grinder. This was a world of stark contrast, where the line between life and death, success and failure, was razor-thin. The glamour and grit of the gladiatorial arena were inseparable, two sides of the same blood-streaked coin. For the Lannister, every day was a gamble, a high-stakes game where the rewards were as tempting as the risks were terrifying. As we peel back the layers, it's clear that the world of the gladiator trainer was one of perpetual tension. They lived in a space where myth and reality coexisted uncomfortably, where the romantic allure of the arena was constantly at odds with its brutal truths. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of, this dichotomy, the games continued to captivate the Roman populace, drawing them in with promises of spectacle and the ever-present whisper of mortality. In this chaotic dance of survival and spectacle, the Lannister was both puppet master and prisoner, bound to a fate as unpredictable as the games themselves. And so, the story continues, with the shadow of the arena looming large over the Lannisters' every move, a constant reminder of the life and death stakes that defined their world. And yet, amid this whirlwind of spectacle and survival, the Lannister found themselves entangled in a web that was as political as it was gladiatorial. You see, in the grand theatre of Rome, the games weren't just about entertainment. They were a political tool, a way for emperors and senators to curry favor with the masses and keep the social fabric from unraveling faster than a toga on a windy day. Take, for instance, the reign of Emperor Commodus, who was so enamored with the gladiatorial games that he fancied himself a gladiator. Commodus wasn't just any fanboy. He actually stepped into the arena, allegedly winning a staggering 620 matches. Of course, when you're the emperor, losing isn't really an option. This wasn't just a case of an emperor with a midlife crisis. It was a savvy political move. By presenting himself as a champion of the people, Commodus aimed to strengthen his bond with the Roman populace, keeping potential unrest at bay. For the Lannister, this kind of imperial enthusiasm was a double-edged sword. On one hand, having the emperor's seal of approval could mean lucrative contracts and a boost in status. On the other hand, it meant navigating a minefield of political expectations and egos larger than the Colosseum itself. Imagine being a small-time trainer suddenly thrust into the spotlight, expected to deliver a show that would please not just the crowd, but the most powerful man in the empire. It was a high-wire act with no safety net, where a misstep could mean losing everything. During times of social unrest, the pressure on trainers ramped up even further. The games were used as a distraction, a way to pacify the masses when the bread supply ran low or the latest tax hike was announced. In the year 190 CE, when the grain supply faltered, it was the Lannister who felt the heat. They had to produce games that would keep the people's minds off their growling stomachs and their empty purses. Failure to do so could result in more than just a bad review. It could mean riots and revolts. Talk about a tough gig. But the Lannister were no strangers to political maneuvering themselves. They had to be, given their precarious position in society. They regularly greased the palms of officials and curried favor with patrons, ensuring that they were in the right place at the right time with the right gladiators. They were like ancient talent agents, wheeling and dealing in the high-stakes market of human lives. They knew that a well-placed word in the ear of a senator could mean the difference between a successful season and financial ruin. Behind the scenes, the Lannister had to keep their gladiators in fighting shape while navigating the whims of their patrons. It was a delicate balance, a constant juggling act. The patrons, often wealthy and influential, wanted nothing less than a spectacular show. They wanted fame and fortune tied to their name, and they expected the Lannister to deliver. The trainers, meanwhile, had to ensure that their gladiators were ready to face the dangers of the arena, all while managing the logistics of food, training, and medical care. The economics of this balancing act were daunting. A top-tier gladiator could bring in thousands of sesterces in winnings and appearance fees, but the cost of maintaining a stable of fighters was astronomical. Food, lodging, training equipment, and medical expenses all added up, not to mention the cost of replacing fighters lost to the arena's deadly embrace. The Lannister had to be as shrewd with their finances as they were with their training regimens. They were the ultimate multitaskers, part accountant, part coach, part diplomat. And let's not forget the social stigma. While the Lannister mingled with the elite, they were still seen as outsiders, profiteers of violence and bloodshed. They occupied a strange liminal space in Roman society, respected for their expertise, yet derided for their trade. It was a constant tightrope walk, a dance of survival in a world where fortunes could change as quickly as the outcome of a gladiatorial bout. Yet, the allure of the games was undeniable. For the Dynasty, for the patrons, for the crowd, the games were an intoxicating mix of danger and spectacle, a chance to brush up against the divine and the deadly. The myths of noble gladiators and heroic battles held a seductive power, even as the gritty reality of broken bodies and political machinations lurked just beneath the surface. In this world of blood and politics, the Lannister was both a player and a pawn, a figure caught in the swirling currents of history. They navigated the treacherous waters of Roman society, their fortunes tied to the whims of emperors and the roar of the crowd. And while the games might have been a temporary distraction, a momentary escape from the burdens of everyday life, for the Dynasty, they were a lifelong dance with danger, a high-stakes game where the only certainty was uncertainty. As we delve deeper into the world of gladiator trainers, it's clear that their story is one of paradox and complexity, a tale of survival and spectacle in a world where myth and reality collided with spectacular, and often deadly, results. And so, the dance continues, with the Dynasty forever caught between the grinding gears of politics and the insatiable hunger of the Roman mob. The Dynasty's tale, like a sword with a double edge, is full of paradoxes and contradictions, a narrative woven with both triumph and tragedy. Let's dig into the lives of some notable trainers who lived through the chaos and spectacle of ancient Rome, leaving their mark on the blood-soaked sands of the arena. These were not just faceless figures in the annals of history, but real individuals whose stories brim with absurdity, ambition, and occasionally a touch of madness. Take Quintus Lentulus Batiatus, for example. Yes, the very same guy who had a run-in with the infamous Spartacus. Batiatus was a Lannister with a penchant for drama and flair, running a ludus in Capua, which was kind of like the Hollywood of gladiator schools. He was the Michael Bay of his time, orchestrating spectacles with larger-than-life personalities and explosive outcomes. Batiatus's biggest claim to fame was his tutelage of Spartacus, the rebellious gladiator whose name still echoes through history. But let's not get carried away with the romantic notion of a trainer and his protege. Batiatus's school was more like a pressure cooker waiting to explode, and explode it did when Spartacus led a revolt that would shake the Roman Empire to its core. Another notable figure was Gaius Aurelius Scaurus, whose name doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but whose story is worth its weight in sesterces. Scaurus was a shrewd businessman who understood that a good show was as much about the narrative as it was about the fight. He once staged a Mark C battle, flooding the arena to recreate a naval skirmish, complete with mini warships and all the salty drama you could ask for. It was the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster, minus the CGI, but with a lot more actual risk of drowning. Scaurus's knack for showmanship made him a favorite among Rome's elite, and his events were the hardest ticket in town. Yet, despite his flair for the dramatic, Scaurus had to constantly navigate the fickle tides of public opinion and imperial favor. His success was as much about his ability to read the political currents as it was about his knack for staging a spectacle. On the flip side of success, we find Dynasty like Decimus Laborius, who learned the hard way that the path to fortune was paved with peril. Laborius was a trainer who poured his resources into a single-star gladiator, betting his future on the prowess of one man. It was the ancient equivalent of putting all your chips on red at the roulette table. Unfortunately for Laborius, his champion was slain in a particularly gruesome match, and with him went Laborius's hopes and savings. The lesson: diversify your portfolio, even when your investments are in human stock. Laborius's story serves as a cautionary tale about the volatile nature of the gladiator business, where fortunes could be as fleeting as a gladiator's life expectancy. Speaking of fleeting fortunes, let's not forget about the absurdities that added a dash of dark humor to the lives of these trainers. Take the infamous incident involving a trainer named Marcus Attilius, who famously lost a bet on a match he himself had rigged. You see, Attilius had wagered a hefty sum against his own gladiator, confident in a well-rehearsed defeat. But in a twist worthy of a Shakespearean comedy, his fighter unexpectedly triumphed, leaving Attilius both victorious and bankrupt. It's a story that underscores the unpredictability of the arena, where even the best-laid plans can be upended by a single swing of the sword. The economic realities of running a ludus were as harsh as the combat itself. Trainers had to be savvy economists, constantly balancing costs with earnings. The price of a new recruit could range from 1,000 to 2,000 sesterces, a small fortune in those days, and that was just the beginning. Maintaining a gladiator was an expensive affair, with food, training, and medical care eating into profits like a lion into a fresh carcass. The pressure to produce winning fighters was immense, and the stakes were life and death literally. A successful gladiator could earn his owner thousands of sesterces in prize money and appearance fees, but a losing streak could lead to financial ruin faster than a chariot gone off the rails. Yet, despite the risks, the allure of the games was irresistible. The promise of fame and fortune, the roar of the crowd, and the chance to rub shoulders with the elite drew many to the profession. Some Dynasty, like Batiatus, managed to achieve a level of celebrity status, their names whispered among Rome's power brokers. Others, like Laborius, were less fortunate, their dreams dashed on the unforgiving sands of the arena. In the end, the life of a gladiator trainer was a constant dance of survival, a high-wire act where the only safety net was one's wits and resilience. It was a world where myth and reality collided, where the romantic allure of the games was inextricably linked to their brutal truths. The Dynasty were the puppet masters of this bloody theatre, forever playing a dangerous game with stakes as high as the heavens and as deep as the underworld. As we wade deeper into the lives of these trainers, it's clear their stories are more than just footnotes in the history of Rome. They are tales of ambition, folly, and the eternal struggle for survival in a world that demanded spectacle and sacrifice in equal measure. And so, their legacy lives on, as we continue to unearth the layers of history, revealing the complexities and contradictions of a profession that was as glamorous as it was grim. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Dynasty is far from over, and there are more twists and turns yet to come in this tale of blood, sweat, and ambition. And so, as the saga of the Dynasty unfolds, we find ourselves navigating the shadowy corridors of historical legacy. You see, these gladiator trainers, with their mix of cunning, grit, and a dash of opportunism, left behind a story as layered as the Colosseum's crumbling stones. Their legacy isn't just about the blood-soaked sands of ancient arenas, but how these tales have been twisted, turned, and spun into the yarns we gorge on today. Fast forward a couple of millennia, thanks to Hollywood and its penchant for dramatic flair, the myth of the noble gladiator and their stoic trainer has been polished to a cinematic sheen. Movies like Gladiator, or TV series like Spartacus, Blood and Sand, have done for the Dynasty what Instagram filters do for selfies, added a touch of glamour that reality never quite had. In these depictions, trainers are often portrayed as wise, grizzled mentors, akin to Mr. Miyagi with a Roman twist. But let's not forget, these were people juggling finances and managing human lives like commodities, not serenely dispensing wisdom on a mountaintop. The romantic allure of the gladiator's tale has always been enticing. Who doesn't love a good underdog story, where the downtrodden rise against impossible odds? But beneath this legend lies a gritty truth. The Dynasty were more akin to modern sports agents, albeit ones dealing in life-or-death contracts rather than endorsement deals. Their success hinged on their ability to produce fighters who could entertain, not just survive. And entertainment, as we know, is a fickle beast. Entertainers, whether in ancient Rome or today, have always served a dual purpose. They're not just there for a bit of fun, they're a balm for society's ills. In Rome, when the bread supply was as thin as a senator's patience, the games were the ultimate distraction. Today, we have Netflix binges and reality TV. The names and faces may change, but the underlying function remains the same. Entertainment is the opiate of the masses, soothing us with spectacle while the world outside spins on its axis. The Dynasty's influence stretches beyond the blood-stained sand, seeping into the very way we view history. The stories of gladiators and their trainers are a testament to how fact and fiction can become tangled like a pair of drunken dancers at an imperial banquet. Historical narratives are often shaped as much by what we want to believe as by what actually happened. The reality of a Lannister's life was a series of high-stakes gambles. They were entrepreneurs in a world where success was as unpredictable as the next emperor's whim. Gladiator trainers, despite their unsavory reputation, were crucial cogs in the Roman machine. They were the ones who could turn a ragtag group of captives into legends, albeit often for a fleeting moment before the sands claimed them. This ability to craft stories from struggle, to create heroes from hardship, is a skill that society continues to value. Today, we might see it in the PR spin of a celebrity comeback, or the narrative arc of a sports team's miraculous victory. The broader implications of the Dynasty's legacy are as relevant now as they were then. In a world where distractions are a click away, and the next big spectacle is always around the corner, it's worth pondering what we're being distracted from. Just as the Romans used games to divert attention from political unrest or economic hardship, modern media often serves a similar purpose. The questions we should ask ourselves are, what narratives are being spun, and why? Whose stories are being told, and whose are being silenced? In the end, the legacy of the gladiator trainers is a reflection of human nature itself. We're drawn to stories of triumph and tragedy, of heroes and villains, because they resonate with something deep within us. But as we consume these tales, we should remember to look beyond the surface glamour. The Dynasty's world was one of harsh realities, where survival depended not just on skill and bravery, but on navigating the treacherous waters of politics and power. So, as we wrap up our journey through the gritty, glorious world of the gladiator trainers, let's keep a few things in mind. Behind every great story is a complex web of truths and half-truths, carefully woven by those with a stake in the narrative. The Dynasty were master storytellers in their own right, crafting legends that have endured for centuries. But like any good tale, there's more beneath the surface if you're willing to look. As you drift off to sleep, ponder this. The stories we tell shape the world we live in. Whether it's the legend of a gladiator trainer or the latest blockbuster, these narratives have power. They entertain, they distract, and sometimes they illuminate the human condition in ways that are both profound and perplexing. So let's continue to question, to dig deeper, and to explore the fascinating tapestry of history that connects us all. And there you have it, folks, the tale of the Dynasty, a saga of blood, sweat, and societal spectacle wrapped up in the echoes of an ancient cheer. Sleep tight, and may your dreams be filled with the roaring crowds and the timeless dance of legends. In the bustling heart of ancient Macedon, where olive groves met the whispers of political ambition, a boy was born destined to reshape the world, whether it liked it or not. Alexander, they called him, in the year 356 BC, a time when most folks were still figuring out how to make a decent toga. Born in the city of Pella, this future world-buster was the offspring of two rather intense personalities. On one side, you had King Philip Roman II, a man with an eye for conquest, and let's just say, a flair for drama. On the other, Queen Olympias, who was as devoted as she was rumored to be a bit, well, mystical. Some said she conversed with snakes, but that's ancient PR for you. Philip Roman II wasn't your run-of-the-mill monarch, lounging around in a laurel wreath. No, sir, he was more like an ancient Tony Stark, minus the tech, but with a whole arsenal of ambition. He took the reins of Macedon when it was more like the scrappy underdog of the Greek world, a place most would consider a backwater. And what did Philip do? He turned that underdog into a powerhouse with a military so innovative that even the Spartans had to pause their perpetual flexing to take notice. By the time Alexander was toddling around, Philip had already restructured the Macedonian army, introducing the phalanx formation, a tight-knit military unit that moved like a well-oiled machine, or as well-oiled as a bunch of guys with long spears could manage. But let's not get too far ahead. Young Alexander, with his mop of golden curls, wasn't just any royal kid. He was a prodigy with a knack for making tutors feel inadequate. By the time he was 13, Philip decided it was time for some serious intellectual firepower. Enter Aristotle, the original man of thought, who was hired to shape Alexander's young mind. Now, Aristotle wasn't just any philosopher. He was the guy who practically wrote the book on logic and science back when people were still figuring out the earth wasn't flat. Teaching Alexander was like being handed the keys to a Ferrari and told to drive carefully. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander didn't just learn to read and write. He devoured the knowledge of the ancients like it was ambrosia. We're talking philosophy, science, medicine, and just a dash of politics, the complete How to Conquer the World in 10 Easy Steps curriculum. He learned about Homer's epics, and like any good teenager with a flair for the dramatic, he idolized Achilles, the ultimate warrior with a footnote for a heel. But Alexander wasn't just about book smarts. He was a hands-on, action-oriented kind of kid. And speaking of hands-on, let's talk about his equestrian exploits. One of the most famous tales of young Alexander is the taming of Bucephalus, a horse with a name that sounds like a sneeze, but was as legendary as they come. According to the story, this horse was a nightmare for most, a beast no one could tame. But Alexander, the teenage horse whisperer, figured out that Bucephalus was spooked by his own shadow. So, in a move that was both clever and a little bit show-offy, Alexander turned the horse to face the sun, and just like that, had the beast eating out of his hand, or at least not throwing him off. This wasn't just a fun party trick. It was a statement. It was Alexander saying, "I'm not just my father's son. I'm a force to be reckoned with." Speaking of his dad, Philip's ambition wasn't just limited to military prowess. He was a political animal, marrying strategically to cement alliances. In fact, Alexander had more half-siblings than you could shake a spear at. Philip's conquests were as much about consolidating power as they were about expanding territory. By the time Alexander hit puberty, Philip had managed to bring most of Greece under his sway, using both the carrot and the stick, though mostly the stick. Now, Macedon was always a place of intrigue, where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Philip's court was a mix of brilliance and backstabbing, with generals and nobles jostling for power like it was the latest Olympic sport. Young Alexander grew up in this environment, learning the ropes of leadership, and probably picking up a few tips on how not to get poisoned at dinner. It was a crash course in realpolitik, and Alexander was taking notes. Despite the chaos, Alexander's relationship with his dad was complicated. Philip was the kind of guy who'd win a battle and then throw the most epic after-party, complete with wine, women, and a generous helping of hubris. But he was also the kind of guy who could dismiss Alexander one minute and praise him the next, like any overbearing parent with a hint of jealousy. You see, Alexander wasn't just shadowing his father. He was stepping into his spotlight, and Philip knew that this kid was more than just a prince. He was a rival in the making. But let's not paint Philip entirely as the bad guy. He was a king doing what kings did best, expanding his kingdom and trying to keep his head attached to his shoulders. It was a tough gig. The political landscape of Macedon was littered with potential assassins and rival claimants. Philip's job was to keep them all in check while pushing the boundaries of his realm, and he did that with a kind of ruthless efficiency that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. For Alexander, this environment was both a playground and a battlefield. He learned the art of diplomacy and the necessity of force, understanding that ruling wasn't just about wearing a crown. It was about wielding power effectively and strategically. He saw firsthand the challenges of leadership and the sacrifices it demanded. The young prince was being groomed for greatness, and with Aristotle's teachings and Philip's example, he was well on his way to becoming a leader who could think as deeply as he could strike fiercely. By the time he was a teenager, Alexander was already showing signs of the leader he would become. He was charismatic, with a presence that commanded attention and a vision that extended beyond the borders of Macedon. He wasn't just dreaming of glory, he was planning for it. The stage was set for his meteoric rise, and with his father's legacy as both a foundation and a challenge, Alexander was poised to step into history as more than just Philip's son. He was Alexander the Great in waiting, ready to carve his own path through the annals of time. And just like that, history decided to throw young Alexander into the deep end. Picture this. It's 336 BC, and Alexander is just 20 years old, probably still getting used to wearing a full beard. His father, Philip Roman II, is assassinated during a wedding banquet, a real-life Game of Thrones moment, minus the dragons. The assassin, Pausanias, was quickly dispatched by Philip's bodyguards, but the damage was done. Alexander found himself thrust onto the throne of Macedon, a kingdom that was both a prize and a poisoned chalice. Now, ascending to the throne at such a tender age wasn't just about donning a fancy crown and posing for statues. It was about navigating a minefield of political intrigue and familial backstabbing. Imagine trying to organize a family reunion where everyone has a dagger hidden up their toga. The young king had to establish his authority quickly or risk becoming the next target for a power-hungry relative or disgruntled noble. Alexander's first move: make it crystal clear that he wasn't a kid playing dress-up in his dad's armor. He immediately set out to secure his position, eliminating any rivals who dared to challenge his rule. This wasn't just a purge. It was a spring cleaning of epic proportions. He executed potential claimants to the throne, including a few pesky cousins, and ensured loyalty by strategically placing allies in key positions. Not exactly warm and fuzzy, but hey, ruling an ancient kingdom wasn't for the faint-hearted. Of course, Alexander wasn't all about the sword. He also wielded the marriage band with strategic brilliance. His mother, Olympias, had instilled in him the art of using marriage as a political tool, a lesson he took to heart. His marriage to Roxana of Bactria, for example, was less about romance and more about sealing alliances and consolidating power in the East. It was a savvy move that helped keep potential rebellions at bay. And let's not forget his supposed divine lineage, a PR spin so audacious it would make modern politicians blush. You see, Alexander's mother had long claimed he was the son of Zeus, the king of the gods himself. Talk about setting high expectations. This divine narrative wasn't just a vanity project. It was a calculated move to elevate his status above mere mortals, making it that much harder for anyone to question his legitimacy. People love a good God-on-Earth story, after all, and Alexander's lineage was the ancient equivalent of a celebrity endorsement. Of course, whether he was Zeus's offspring or just a really ambitious guy with a god complex, we'll leave to the philosophers. But back to the earthly realm, where Alexander was busy earning his stripes on the battlefield. His early military campaigns were a blend of brilliance and chaos, like a symphony where half the orchestra is improvising. His first significant test came when he faced the unruly tribes of Thrace and Illyria, who were less than thrilled about a new king on the block. Alexander's response was swift and devastating. In a series of lightning-fast campaigns, he crushed resistance with a combination of tactical genius and sheer audacity. His army, trained in the phalanx formation perfected by dear old Dad, moved like a well-drilled machine. Imagine a wall of soldiers, shields locked, spears bristling like a moving hedgehog of doom. It was military choreography at its finest, and under Alexander's leadership, it became a force of nature. The young king wasn't just a commander. He was a warrior, leading from the front and sharing in the dangers of battle. His charisma and courage won him the loyalty of his men, and soon tales of his exploits began to spread. He was becoming a living legend, and he was just getting started. But let's not get too rosy-eyed about these early victories. War was brutal, and Alexander's campaigns left a trail of destruction. Cities were razed, populations displaced, and economies disrupted. The cost of war was high, and while Alexander was amassing glory, the ordinary people were often left to pick up the pieces. It's a classic case of history being written by the victors, with the harsh realities conveniently glossed over in favor of heroic narratives. As Alexander's reputation grew, so did his ambitions. He wasn't content with simply ruling Macedon. He had his sights set on the Persian Empire, a sprawling superpower with wealth and resources that made Macedon look like a corner shop. The Persian Empire, under King Darius Roman III, was the big league, and Alexander was eager to prove himself on this grand stage. He saw it as his destiny, a chance to carve his name into the annals of history as a conqueror of empires. But before he could embark on his Persian adventure, Alexander had to secure his western front. The Greek city-states, always a fractious bunch, were a constant thorn in Macedon's side. Many of them saw Philip's death as an opportunity to shake off Macedonian domination. Thebes, in particular, decided it was time for a bit of rebellion, perhaps thinking the young king wouldn't be able to handle the pressure. Alexander's response was as swift as it was decisive. He marched his army south, and in a show of both force and diplomacy, he brought the Greek city-states to heel. The message was clear. Alexander was not a king to be trifled with. Thebes, however, didn't get the memo. They revolted, and Alexander's reaction was brutal. The city was sacked, its population sold into slavery, and Thebes was wiped off the map. It was a harsh lesson in the realities of power, and a chilling demonstration of what happened when you crossed the new king of Macedon. With Greece firmly under his control, Alexander turned his gaze eastward, ready to take on the might of Persia. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another time. For now, let's leave Alexander poised on the brink of his greatest adventure, a young king with the world at his feet and a destiny to fulfill. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that sometimes the boldest moves come from those who dare to dream big, and Alexander was nothing if not bold. And so, with Greece securely under his command, and Thebes reduced to a cautionary tale for would-be rebels, Alexander shifted his focus to the dream that had been simmering since he first heard Homer's tales of heroics, the conquest of Persia. This wasn't just a war. This was an epic clash of civilizations. Picture a young king standing on the brink of immortality, ready to pit his wits against the great Persian Empire, a sprawling behemoth that stretched from Egypt to the Indus Valley. It was like David versus Goliath, if David had a penchant for grandiose declarations and a really impressive army. Speaking of armies, let's talk logistics, because moving tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, and enough supplies to feed them across Asia isn't exactly a walk in the park. This was an operation so massive that it would make modern military planners break out in a cold sweat. We're talking about an army of roughly 40, 000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry, plus a support crew that would put a rock band's entourage to shame. And they weren't just marching across the neighborhood. They were setting out on a trek that would cover over 20,000 miles. That's like hoofing it from New York to Sydney and back, minus the frequent flyer miles. The costs, astronomical. Feeding an army on the move was no small feat. Each soldier required about 2 pounds of grain and a pound of meat per day. Multiply that by tens of thousands, and you start to appreciate the scale of ancient campaign logistics. And we're not even touching on the transport of weapons, armor, tents, and the all-important wine. Because let's face it, even ancient soldiers needed a little liquid courage. It's estimated that the daily cost of maintaining Alexander's army was equivalent to millions in today's dollars. Talk about burning through cash faster than a lottery winner on a Vegas weekend. But Alexander wasn't just about logistics. He was a master strategist, both on and off the battlefield. His first major test against the Persians came at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC. Now, Issus wasn't your typical clash of armies. It was more like a game of chess where the pieces were soldiers, and the stakes were, just the control of the known world. Alexander faced King Darius Roman III, who, by the way, had an army that dwarfed Alexander's like a sumo wrestler next to a ballet dancer. Estimates suggest Darius commanded up to 100,000 men, though ancient sources might have been prone to a little exaggeration. Still, it was a formidable force, and Alexander's smaller army had to rely on brains over brawn. The terrain at Issus played perfectly into Alexander's hands, a narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea, which neutralized the Persian numerical advantage. In a move that would make Sun Tzu nod approvingly, Alexander used the geography to funnel Darius's forces, turning their numbers into a disadvantage. The battle itself, a whirlwind of chaos and calculated brilliance. Alexander led the charge personally, aiming directly for Darius, who, in a rather unkingly fashion, decided discretion was the better part of valor and fled the battlefield, leaving his army in disarray. It was a decisive victory, and while legends would later paint it as a clash of titans, the gritty reality was one of mud, blood, and the relentless grind of warfare. Now, let's not forget the economic ramifications of these campaigns. Alexander wasn't just after glory, he was after gold. The Persian Empire was fabulously wealthy, with treasuries that would make Scrooge McDuck salivate. Capturing these resources wasn't just about funding his war machine. It was about ensuring that Alexander's rule was financially sustainable. After Issus, Alexander captured Darius's family and his war chest, which reportedly amounted to 3,000 talents, an ancient metric that translates to about 170,000 pounds of silver. That's enough to make any conqueror grin like a Cheshire cat. But Alexander wasn't done yet. Fresh from his victory at Issus, he set his sights on Egypt, the breadbasket of the ancient world. His arrival in 332 BC was less of a conquest and more of a welcome parade. The Egyptians, not particularly fond of their Persian overlords, practically rolled out the red carpet for Alexander, recognizing him as a liberator. He was crowned as pharaoh, and in a masterstroke of PR, founded the city of Alexandria, the first of many, Because if there's one thing Alexander loved more than conquering, it was naming cities after himself. With Egypt secured, Alexander turned his attention back to Persian matters. The stage was set for one of the most famous battles in history. Guerrilla fought in 331 BC. This was the real showdown, the main event, where Darius had assembled a force so vast it reportedly stretched for miles. The Persians had everything from war elephants to scythe chariots, because why settle for a regular chariot when you can strap blades to the wheels? It was a fearsome arsenal, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Yet, once again, Alexander's tactical genius shone through. He employed a bold maneuver, the oblique order, where his forces attacked at an angle, creating a gap in the Persian lines. It was risky, audacious, and it worked like a charm. As the Persians scrambled to adapt, Alexander spotted a weakness and drove his cavalry straight at Darius. The Persian king, perhaps not eager to repeat his Issus experience, chose flight over fight. The battle was won, and with it, the Persian Empire lay open to conquest. Guerrilla wasn't just a military victory, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Alexander's charisma and reputation had already begun to erode Persian morale before the first sword was drawn. His ability to inspire loyalty in Project Invincibility was as much a weapon as any sword or spear. Yet, beyond the legendary veneer, the reality was stark. The battlefield was a scene of carnage, the aftermath a testament to the brutality of ancient warfare. As the dust settled, Alexander stood triumphant, but the real work was just beginning. Conquering Persia wasn't just about winning battles, it was about governing a vast, diverse empire. Alexander's genius wasn't just in his conquests, but in his ability to integrate and adapt. He adopted Persian customs, married a Persian princess, and encouraged his men to do the same. It was a blend of cultures that would shape the Hellenistic world for centuries. Yet, for all the glory and grandeur, Alexander's campaigns were a double-edged sword. They left a trail of destruction and displacement, the costs of which were borne by the ordinary people. The romantic tales of conquest often gloss over the harsh realities. The cities in ruins, the economies disrupted, the lives forever altered. Alexander's legacy is a complex tapestry of brilliance and brutality, a reminder that history's heroes are often far more complicated than the legends suggest. But let's not wrap this up with too neat a bow. Alexander's story is far from over. The young king, now ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen, was not content to rest on his laurels. His gaze turned further east, to the mysterious lands beyond the Indus, where new challenges awaited. But that, my friends, is a saga for another day. For now, let's leave Alexander on the cusp of new horizons, a conqueror whose ambitions knew no bounds, and whose story is as riveting today as it was 2 millennia ago. And so, with Alexander perched on the brink of new horizons, ready to conquer lands that hadn't even made it onto most Greek maps, let's zoom in on one of the more sun-drenched chapters of his career, his Egyptian escapade in 331 BC. Now, if you were expecting the usual blood-soaked conquest, think again. Egypt was more like a grand opening gala for Alexander, complete with welcoming committee and probably fewer angry mobs than he'd gotten used to. You see, the Egyptians were fed up with Persian rule, and Alexander's arrival was more liberator than invader. It was the kind of PR win that would make modern spin doctors green with envy. Here was Alexander, striding into Egypt like a rock star on a world tour. Only his entourage was an army, and his stage was the sands of Giza. The Egyptians embraced him as pharaoh, and Alexander, never one to miss a chance to flex his divine credentials, played the part to perfection. And what better way to cement your status than by founding a city? In a move that screamed both ambition and ego, Alexander established Alexandria, destined to become a beacon of Hellenistic culture. Located strategically on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria was like the ancient world's Silicon Valley, an incubator for ideas, trade, and occasionally a philosopher or two. But founding a city wasn't just a matter of slapping your name on a signpost. It was about laying the groundwork for cultural exchange, economic prosperity, and let's be honest, bragging rights. Alexandria quickly became a melting pot, attracting scholars, merchants, and anyone with a nose for opportunity. It was a place where Greek and Egyptian cultures intertwined, creating a rich tapestry that would endure long after Alexander himself had left the building, so to speak. Now, let's talk about the cultural exchanges that were as much a part of Alexander's legacy as his military conquests. This blending of Greek and Egyptian traditions was a masterclass in diplomacy, as much about strategy as it was about synergy. Alexander adopted Egyptian customs, styled himself in the likeness of their pharaohs, and even participated in local religious ceremonies. It was a savvy move, like an ancient leader's version of kissing babies on the campaign trail. By respecting local traditions, Alexander ensured stability and, importantly, loyalty. But let's not gloss over the fact that Alexander's god complex was hitting its stride around this time. It wasn't enough to be king. He fancied himself a deity. This wasn't just a case of royal hubris. It was political calculus. Claiming divine status was a way to solidify his rule, a narrative that made challenging his authority akin to blasphemy. His visit to the Oracle of Siwa is a case in point. Out in the Libyan desert, the Oracle supposedly confirmed his divine paternity, because nothing says, "I'm the son of Zeus," like a cryptic prophecy in the middle of nowhere. But let's not kid ourselves. This divine narrative was a double-edged sword. Sure, it elevated him in the eyes of his subjects, but it also set expectations sky high. Being considered a god might boost your approval ratings, but it also means that every stubbed toe or military setback becomes an existential crisis. Imagine the pressure of living up to divine standards when you've got a very mortal army to feed and an empire to run. Speaking of running an empire, Alexander's political maneuvers were as intricate as his military ones. He wasn't just about swinging swords, he was about winning hearts and minds. His policy of integrating conquered peoples into his army and administration was revolutionary. By promoting non-Greeks to positions of power, Alexander was creating a new kind of empire, one where loyalty was based on shared ambition rather than ethnicity. It was a bold move, one that laid the foundation for the Hellenistic world, a sprawling, diverse mosaic that would influence cultures far and wide. Yet, for all these grand gestures and cultural exchanges, the harsh realities of empire building were never far away. While Alexandria was thriving, the rest of Egypt, and indeed the broader empire, was grappling with the economic strains of constant warfare. The costs were staggering. War wasn't just about glory, it was about resources, and the pressure on local economies was immense. While Alexander was busy playing God King, ordinary folks were dealing with the very real consequences of his ambitions: disrupted trade, unstable markets, and the ever-present threat of conscription. But Alexander had a knack for turning challenges into opportunities. His charisma and military prowess weren't just for show. They were tools he used to maintain control and inspire loyalty. As his legend grew, so did his influence, and with it, the shape of his legacy. Even in his lifetime, stories of his exploits were becoming larger than life. Yet beneath the myth, there was a man grappling with the complexities of power, the weight of expectation, and the relentless drive to achieve more. And so, as we leave Alexander amidst the sands of Egypt, let's remember that his story is far from over. With his eyes set on new conquests, the young king was about to embark on yet another bold chapter of his remarkable journey. The world lay before him, a canvas on which to paint his dreams, but also a stage where the stakes were higher than ever. Stay tuned, because the saga of Alexander the Great is just getting started, with more twists, turns, and tantalizing tales to come. So, as Alexander dusted off those Egyptian sands, his eyes were already scanning the horizon for the next big conquest. It wasn't enough to just be king of kings. He wanted to be the king of everything. Enter India, a mysterious land that conjured images of wealth, exotic cultures, and let's be honest, plenty of war elephants. Alexander wasn't just chasing glory. He was chasing the kind of immortality that only comes from doing something so audacious that future generations would stare slack-jawed in disbelief. In 326 BC, Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush with an army that was now more like a United Nations of the ancient world, featuring Macedonians, Greeks, Persians, and others. This was diversity before it became a corporate buzzword. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was no leisurely stroll. The march took a harsh toll on his troops, who were probably questioning their life choices as they trudged through unforgiving terrain. The rivers were torrents, the mountains were treacherous, and the weather was enough to make even the hardiest soldier yearn for a warm bath and a cozy fire. His first major test came at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, where he faced King Porus and his army, complete with those famed war elephants. Now, you might think a bunch of elephants would be the ultimate trump card in ancient warfare, but Alexander turned them into a liability faster than you can say pachyderm panic. Using his signature blend of tactical genius and sheer audacity, he maneuvered his forces to outflank Porus, eventually capturing him. Instead of executing his formidable foe, Alexander, in a rare moment of magnanimity, restored Porus to his throne, just with a little Macedonian oversight, of course. But that victory was a double-edged sword. While it proved his military prowess, it also stretched his resources and his troops' patience to the breaking point. The army, exhausted and homesick, finally mutinied on the banks of the Hyphases River. Even Alexander's legendary charisma couldn't convince them to march further into the unknown. Realizing that even demigods need to pick their battles wisely, he reluctantly turned back, marking the easternmost point of his conquests. Heading back wasn't a simple matter of retracing steps. Alexander decided to take a different route along the coast, through the Gedrosian desert. This wasn't just a detour, it was a death march. The desert, unforgiving and relentless, claimed more lives than any battle had. Supplies ran out, men died of thirst, and the dream of conquest turned into a nightmare of survival. It was a harsh lesson in the limits of ambition, even for someone who was supposedly touched by the divine. By the time he returned to Babylon in 323 BC, Alexander was a shadow of his former self. Gone was the bright-eyed conqueror, placed by a man worn down by years of relentless campaigning. Yet his mind was still buzzing with plans for new conquests, as if the world itself was his unfinished canvas. But fate had other ideas. After a night of heavy drinking, because some habits die harder than others, Alexander fell ill. The details of his illness read like a medical whodunit, with theories ranging from typhoid fever to a sneaky bout of malaria. Whatever it was, it proved fatal. On June 10, 323 BC, Alexander the Great died at the age of 32. Just like that, the man who had been larger than life was suddenly very mortal. His death left a power vacuum the size of his empire, and chaos was quick to fill the void. Without a clear successor, Alexander was better at conquering than planning retirement. His generals, known as the Diadochi, carved up his empire like it was a particularly juicy turkey at Thanksgiving. What followed was a game of thrones that would make even the Lannisters blush. The empire was divided into several Hellenistic kingdoms, each ruled by one of his former generals. Ptolemy took Egypt and promptly turned it into a cultural and economic powerhouse, with Alexandria as its jewel. Seleucus grabbed a chunk that stretched from the eastern Mediterranean to India, while Antigonus picked up the pieces in Asia Minor and Greece. It was as if Alexander's empire had been a beautiful, albeit fragile, vase that shattered upon his death, each shard becoming a new center of power. But let's not end on a note of despair. Alexander's legacy wasn't just about the lands he conquered or the battles he won. It was about the cultural melting pot he stirred into existence. The Hellenistic world was a vibrant blend of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian cultures, a testament to the power of ideas over iron. Alexandria became a beacon of learning and innovation, home to the great library and the lighthouse, two wonders that would inspire awe for centuries. And what about the man himself? Alexander's life is a cautionary tale wrapped in a saga of epic proportions. He was a visionary and a tyrant, a liberator and a conqueror. His story is a reminder that greatness is a double-edged sword, as capable of cutting down its wielder as it is of shaping the world. It's a story that captivates us to this day, not just because of what he achieved, but because of the audacity with which he dared to dream. In the end, Alexander's legacy is a mirror reflecting the complexities of human ambition. He showed us that the line between hero and villain is often blurred, and that the pursuit of greatness can be both a noble endeavor and a perilous path. His life raises questions that are as relevant now as they were 2 millennia ago. What does it mean to be a leader? How do we balance ambition with responsibility? And perhaps most importantly, how do we measure the true cost of a legacy? So, dear listeners, as you drift off into that sweet embrace of sleep, let Alexander's story remind you of the power and peril of dreaming big. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that while the sands of time may bury the past, the stories of those who dared to shape the world endure, forever etched in the annals of time. In a world where the wind is your closest companion and the horizon stretches endlessly, you find yourself among the Scythians, the legendary nomads of the Eurasian steppes. It's around 700 BCE, and you're smack in the middle of a landscape that makes the word vast sound like an understatement. We're not talking a backyard here. This is a sprawling expanse that would make even the most seasoned traveler clutch their map in despair. You wake up each day to the sight of open plains, a sweeping canvas painted in shades of gold and green. It's a place where survival is less about the latest gadget and more about grit, tenacity, and yes, a healthy appreciation for horses. But before we dive into the glamour of galloping steeds, let's take a closer look at the nuts and bolts of your Scythian existence. Your diet, for starters, is not exactly what you call a balanced meal plan by modern standards. Think meat, lots of it. Whether it's mutton, beef, or horse, yes, your four-legged friend might also be dinner. Protein is the name of the game. Vegetables, not unless you count some wild onions for flavor. Fermented mare's milk, known as kumis, is your drink of choice, and it packs a punch stronger than any latte you've ever had. It's an acquired taste, but when you're living in the middle of nowhere, you take what you can get. Clothing is another story of practicality over fashion. Forget designer labels. Your outfit is all about function. You're wrapped in layers of wool and felt, sometimes even leather to fend off the biting winds. The steppes are no runway, and your attire reflects that harsh reality. But don't sell it short. These garments are crafted with skill, keeping you warm and mobile, a crucial combination when the world is your playground. Now, about those horses. There's a tendency to romanticize the Scythians as the ultimate horse whisperers, taming wild steeds with ease. And sure, you might be an excellent rider, but let's not overlook the complexities. Horses are the SUVs of the steppe world, necessary for travel and warfare, but maintaining them is no small feat. Feeding them in a landscape of sparse grass is a logistical puzzle, and let's not even get started on their need for water. You manage because you must, but it turns out that the life of a Scythian equestrian isn't all gallops and glory. Horses are central to your way of life, not just in getting from point A to point B, but also in warfare. Mounted archery is your bread and butter, and you're part of a formidable force that can strike fear into enemies with swift, agile attacks. But there's a reason you're not constantly charging into battle. For one, maintaining a cavalry requires a lot of resources and strategic planning. You've got to pick your battles, quite literally, because horse upkeep is costly in terms of time and effort. The steppes themselves present their own challenges, a landscape that's beautiful but brutal. The sheer size of it all affects every aspect of your life, from the routes you travel to the alliances you build. Your world is dictated by the rhythm of the seasons, and while you might be a master of mobility, the environment never lets you forget who's really in charge. It's a land that demands respect, and you've learned to give it just that, or else. Socially, your world is a tapestry woven with complex relationships. You belong to a tribe, a community that's both your family and your safety net. Loyalty is the currency here, and it's earned through shared struggles and triumphs. Hierarchies are fluid, a meritocracy where skill and bravery can elevate your status. Women, too, hold notable roles, sometimes joining men in hunting and warfare, challenging the notion that the steppes were a strictly patriarchal society. You might hear tales of the Scythians as ruthless warriors, terrorizing their neighbors with raids and plunder. And while there's some truth to that, it's not the whole story. Trade is just as vital to your people as warfare, and the steppes are a crossroads for goods and ideas. From the Greeks to the Persians, you've got connections that span continents, exchanging furs, slaves, and metalwork in a network that would make modern shipping companies green with envy. As the sun sets over the endless plains, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, you find a moment of quiet reflection. Life here is a balancing act, a dance with nature that demands both respect and resilience. The Scythian way is one of adaptation, of thriving in a world that offers few certainties, except the ones you carve out for yourself. Here, you live not just in spite of the harshness, but because of it, finding strength in the struggle and beauty in the vast, open world that is your home. And as you sit there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the vastness of the steppe reminds you that life as a Scythian is a tapestry of contrasts. Beauty and brutality, freedom and necessity, myth and reality. Let's talk social structures, shall we? The Scythians weren't just a band of nomadic warriors with nothing but time and a penchant for archery. No, they had an intricate social fabric woven with threads of loyalty, skill, and surprisingly for the time, a level of gender equality that would make a modern egalitarian nod in approval. Forget the rigid hierarchies of ancient Greece or Persia. Here, power and respect were earned, not inherited, and sometimes it was the women who wielded the bow and the influence. Take the myth of the Amazonian warrior women. Yes, you've heard the tales of fierce women riding into battle alongside their male counterparts. While Greek writers like Herodotus might have spun these stories with a touch of dramatic flair, archaeology gives a nod to the reality behind the myth. Graves unearthed in the Eurasian steppes reveal that up to a third of Scythian warriors were women, and these weren't just ceremonial roles. We're talking arrowheads, spears, and even war injuries that paint a picture of women who fought and bled alongside the men. These discoveries challenge the notion that the battlefield was a man's domain and hint at a society where survival trumped traditional gender roles. But why, you ask, did the Scythians embrace such a progressive stance on gender, while the rest of the ancient world struggled to let women out of the kitchen? In the harsh realities of the steppe, practicality was king or queen, as the case may be. The Scythians needed every able-bodied person to contribute, whether in battle or in the hunt. In a world where your survival depended on the strength of your community, sidelining half your population was a luxury you simply couldn't afford. It's a lesson in necessity driving social evolution, dictated not by ideology, but by the unforgiving demands of the environment. Now, don't get too swept away by this romantic vision of gender equality. The Scythians were not proto-feminists holding seminars on gender studies. The inclusion of women in warfare and hunting was born out of sheer necessity, more than a philosophical stance on equality. And while women could earn their place as warriors, they were also expected to fulfill traditional roles within the family and community. The balance of power was as delicate as it was practical, a dance of duties and expectations shaped by the ever-present spectre of survival. As for the men, their roles were no less complex. While they were often the face of the Scythian warrior ethos, leading raids and negotiating alliances, their status was equally contingent on competence and contribution. This wasn't a world where you could coast on a family name. You had to prove your worth at every turn, whether through combat prowess, strategic acumen, or the ability to navigate the social and political intricacies of tribe life. In a society that celebrated skill and bravery, leadership was as much about earning respect as it was about exerting power. Now, let's debunk another myth, the idea that the Scythians were nothing more than marauding nomads, terrorizing their neighbors with no regard for diplomacy or trade. It's an image that might make for thrilling tales, but doesn't quite capture the full picture. The Scythians were savvy operators in the ancient economy, with trade routes stretching from the Black Sea to the edges of the Persian Empire. They dealt in furs, slaves, and intricate metalwork, integrating themselves into a web of commerce that spanned continents. Their ability to balance warfare with trade was not just a testament to their adaptability, but also a vital component of their survival strategy. This duality of war and trade meant that the Scythians were as likely to be found in a marketplace as on a battlefield, negotiating deals as deftly as they wielded their bows. It's a reminder that even in a society built on martial prowess, the sword was not always mightier than the pen, or in this case, the barter agreement. The Scythians understood that power came not just from the ability to conquer, but from the ability to connect, to build relationships that could withstand the shifting sands of politics and geography. In this light, the Scythians reveal themselves not as the untamed barbarians of ancient lore, but as a people who mastered the art of living in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They were warriors, yes, but also traders, diplomats, and pioneers of a social order that defied the conventional wisdom of their time. Their legacy, etched in the windswept plains of the steppe, is one of resilience and innovation, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of nature's most formidable challenges. So, as the last light fades and the stars begin their silent vigil over the steppe, you find yourself pondering the intricate dance of life among the Scythians. It's a story of survival, yes, but also of the timeless interplay between myth and reality, where the lines blur and the truth is often as compelling as the legend. In the end, the Scythians remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a narrative shaped by the choices and challenges of those who lived it. And as we delve deeper into their world, we uncover not just the past, but the enduring truths about ourselves. As we pivot from the Scythians' daily grind to their spiritual lives, prepare yourself for a journey into rituals that are as fascinating as they are spine-chilling. You might think of the Scythians as rough-and-tumble nomads, but their religious beliefs and funeral practices reveal a complex tapestry of reverence and practicality that would make even the most seasoned anthropologist raise an eyebrow. First off, let's talk about their religious beliefs, a cocktail of animism, ancestor worship, and shamanistic practices that would make a modern spiritual guru swoon in envy. The Scythians weren't about building grand temples or erecting statues. They were more into the idea that the divine was woven into the very fabric of the world around them. Nature was their cathedral, and every hill, river, and tree was imbued with spiritual significance. This wasn't just a quaint belief system. It was a pragmatic way to make sense of a world where survival was a daily struggle. When the steppe could either nourish or starve you, believing it was inhabited by powerful spirits wasn't just spiritual, it was smart. Enter Herodotus, our ancient gossip columnist, who gives us a peek into the Scythian spiritual psyche with tales that are as colorful as they are controversial. He writes about the Scythian deities with a mix of awe and skepticism, naming Tabidi as the goddess of the hearth and Apia as the earth goddess. But here's the kicker. The Scythians didn't just pray to their gods, they partied with them. Their rituals often involved a heady mix of music, dancing, and some very potent brews. Imagine a festival where the line between the mortal and the divine was as blurred as the vision of someone who's had a few too many. Now, let's get to the part that's bound to make your hair stand on end, the funeral practices. If you thought the Scythians were intense in life, wait till you hear about their send-off ceremonies. When a prominent Scythian died, it was more than just a personal loss. It was a communal event, a blend of grief, celebration, and a touch of the macabre. These funerals were elaborate affairs, often lasting several weeks, a testament to the deceased's importance and the community's respect for the afterlife. Herodotus, ever the dramatic storyteller, describes how the Scythians would bury their dead in large burial mounds called kurgans. Think ancient versions of hill-sized tombs. But before you picture a serene graveside service, let's unpack the details. The dead were not merely laid to rest. They were accompanied by a retinue of sacrifices that included horses, servants, and sometimes even family members. Yes, you heard that right. The Scythians believed in equipping their dead with everything they might need in the next world. Talk about packing for the ultimate journey. While this might sound like a horror story to us, for the Scythians, it was a practical expression of their beliefs. The boundary between life and death was more of a revolving door than a brick wall. In a society where the line between the living and the spiritual was perpetually blurred, sending off their dead with an entourage made perfect sense. It was a way of ensuring continuity, of maintaining the social order even in the afterlife. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. These ceremonies were as much about power and prestige as they were about spirituality. Burial mounds served as status symbols, towering over the landscape as eternal reminders of a chieftain's legacy. And while the idea of sacrificing companions might seem grotesque, it was also a demonstration of the deceased's influence, a final testament to their standing in the community. In a world where reputation was everything, even death was an opportunity to reinforce your place in the social hierarchy. There's a gritty reality behind these rituals, a reflection of the Scythians' pragmatic worldview. They understood that the harsh steppe demanded respect and preparedness, both in life and in death. Their funeral practices, with all their elaborate rites and grim sacrifices, were a way of ensuring that the living continued to respect the dead, and by extension, the forces that governed their transient existence. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the mysteries of the ancient world, remember the Scythians and their remarkable rituals. They remind us that history is not just a chronicle of events, but a rich tapestry of beliefs and practices that reflect the enduring struggle to make sense of the world. As the Scythians knew all too well, life is fleeting, but the stories we leave behind, etched in the earth and in the memories of those who follow, are what truly endure. But let's not stop at their spiritual practices. Let's pivot from the Scythians' ethereal connections to their very earthly trade networks. Because if there's anything more impressive than galloping across the steppes, it's doing so with a caravan of goods that could make even Amazon Prime seem sluggish. Picture this. The Scythians were the ultimate middlemen, the ancient equivalent of a Silk Road express lane. They weren't just warriors. They were the FedEx of the ancient world, connecting the darts between East and West with a savvy that would make any modern entrepreneur nod in admiration. Now, you might be thinking, Scythians, traders. Yeah, it's easy to dismiss them as just marauding horsemen with a penchant for decorative tattoos. But these nomads were plugged into a vast commercial network that spanned from Greece to China, with more pit stops than a Formula One race. They were the human hyperlinks of their time, their interactions as complex as the braided patterns on their horse blankets. Let's dive into some specifics. The Scythians traded in furs, slaves, and metalwork, items as hot in the ancient marketplace as the latest iPhone is today. Those elaborate gold ornaments you see in museums, a Scythian trademark, crafted with such finesse that even the most ardent minimalist might reconsider their style. And these weren't just trinkets for show. Gold was the currency of power and prestige, a way to cement alliances and gain leverage in a world where trust was as scarce as water in the steppe. The Scythians' trade prowess also brought them into contact with the Greeks, who were all about olive oil, wine, and philosophy. You see, the Greeks and Scythians were the original odd couple. The Greeks, with their city-states and love for democracy, must have looked at the Scythians' freewheeling lifestyle and wondered if they'd stumbled into a toga party gone rogue. But the Scythians had something the Greeks wanted, access to the grain-rich lands of the Black Sea region. In return, the Greeks offered wine and luxury goods, a trade-off that kept both parties pleasantly inebriated and well-fed. Now, let's talk logistics. The Scythians weren't hauling their wares on the backs of horses alone. They utilized the mighty Dnieper and Don rivers, natural highways that sliced through the steppe like arteries. These rivers were the ancient equivalent of a 6-lane freeway, bustling with traffic, and the Scythians navigated them with the precision of a seasoned sailor. This wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was strategic genius, allowing the Scythians to move goods swiftly across vast distances. And while we're on the topic of strategic genius, let's not forget their interactions with the mighty Persian Empire. The Scythians weren't afraid to play the long game, and their alliance with Persia was a masterstroke in geopolitical chess. By allying with the Persians, the Scythians gained protection from the ever-ambitious Greeks and a foothold in one of the most powerful empires of the time. It was a relationship built on mutual benefit, each side eyeing the other with a mix of respect and suspicion, like two alpha dogs circling the same bone. But this isn't just a story of trade routes and alliances. It's a tale of adaptation, of a people who understood that survival meant more than just brute strength. The Scythians mastered the art of diplomacy, using trade as a tool to weave a web of connections that spanned continents. They were not the isolated barbarians of myth, but savvy negotiators who understood the value of a good deal. Yet, for all their economic savvy, the Scythians' world was one of constant flux. Their alliances were as fluid as the rivers they traveled, and the same trade networks that brought wealth also brought competition and conflict. The Scythians danced on a razor's edge, balancing the demands of trade with the realities of a volatile geopolitical landscape. They were both the bridge and the barrier between East and West, a role that came with its own set of challenges and rewards. In this light, the Scythians emerged not as the untamed marauders of ancient legend, but as a people who understood the complexities of their world and thrived within them. They were warriors, yes, but also traders, diplomats, and innovators, deftly navigating a world where the only constant was change. They remind us that history is not just a series of battles and conquests, but a tapestry of human ambition, resilience, and ingenuity. As we wrap up this leg of our journey through the Scythian steppes, keep in mind that their story is far from over. We've seen their rituals, glimpsed their trade networks, and marveled at their strategic acumen. But there's more to uncover, more to understand about a people who carved out a life in one of the harshest environments on Earth. So, as the sun sets once more on the endless plains, casting long shadows that stretch into the unknown, we leave the Scythians with a promise to return, to delve deeper into their world and unearth the truths that lie hidden among the echoes of the past. So, we leave the Scythians with a promise to return, to delve deeper into their world and unearth the truths that lie hidden among the echoes of the past. But before we get too misty-eyed, let's cast our gaze on the twilight of this equestrian empire. The Scythians, once the lords of the steppes, eventually found themselves riding into the sunset of their own narrative. It's a tale of decline that's as inevitable as it is fascinating, wrapped in both the romance of adventure and the harsh reality of history's relentless march. Around the 3rd century BCE, the Scythians began to feel the squeeze, a perfect storm of internal strife and external pressures. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a midlife crisis, but instead of buying a sports car, they were dealing with geopolitical stress and neighborly invasions. The Sarmatians, a tribe of formidable warriors from the east, decided it was time to test the mettle of their Scythian counterparts. Armed with superior cavalry tactics and a penchant for territorial expansion, the Sarmatians gradually pushed the Scythians out of their prime real estate on the Pontic steppe. It was less of a dramatic eviction and more of a slow, methodical squeeze, like an unwelcome roommate gradually taking over more of the apartment. Meanwhile, over in the west, the Greek colonies along the Black Sea coast were no longer the friendly trading partners they once were. Instead, they were morphing into rivals, each vying for control of the lucrative trade routes that the Scythians had dominated for centuries. Just like that, the economic lifeblood of the Scythian world was under threat, and the pressure was mounting faster than a horse at full gallop. Internally, things weren't exactly peaky either. The Scythians, masters of mobility, found themselves grappling with the challenges of transitioning from a nomadic lifestyle to a more settled existence. The very adaptability that had served them so well became a double-edged sword, as the once fluid social structures started to buckle under the weight of societal change. The allure of settled life came with its own set of headaches: resource management, land disputes, and the ever-dreaded bureaucracy of governance. It's like they traded in their wild, adventurous road trip for a mortgage and a stack of utility bills. But let's not paint too bleak a picture just yet. The Scythians weren't completely down and out. Even as their influence waned, they splintered into smaller groups, some of which held on to their cultural identity while adapting to new realities. In Crimea, a branch known as the Crimean Scythians managed to create a semi-independent kingdom that lasted until the 3rd century CE. These resilient descendants clung to their heritage like a worn-out favorite jacket, threadbare, but still stylish in its own right. So, what legacy did the Scythians leave behind? For one, their military innovations, particularly in mounted warfare, echoed through the ages, influencing a cavalcade of subsequent horse-loving cultures, from the Huns to the Mongols. The Scythian knack for strategic alliances and trade didn't just vanish, it morphed, seeping into the very fabric of Eurasian history. It's like they handed the baton of innovation to the next group of nomadic dynamos, saying, "Here's how it's done, kid." Moreover, their artistic legacy, those intricate gold ornaments and vivid tattoos, still capture the imagination, a testament to a culture that balanced the rugged with the refined. These artifacts remind us that the Scythians were not just warriors, but also creators, capable of weaving beauty into the mundane fabric of survival. The myths surrounding the Scythians, those tales of fierce horsemen and enigmatic warrior women, offer a lens through which we view the romanticized past. But the reality, it's a sobering reminder that history is often a messy confluence of choices, challenges, and compromises. The Scythians were both more and less than the legends suggest, more complex, more adaptable, and yet, ultimately, as vulnerable to the tides of change as anyone else. In today's world, the Scythians invite us to reflect on the balance between tradition and adaptation, between the allure of the past and the demands of the present. They challenge us to reconsider how we define power and legacy, reminding us that the true measure of a culture lies not only in its conquests, but in its capacity to adapt, innovate, and inspire. As the final notes of this Scythian saga play out, we're left with a tapestry of history that's as intricate and layered as the steppe itself. It's a story of rise and fall, of myth and reality, woven into the vast expanse of the Eurasian landscape. And as we close this chapter, we carry with us the echoes of hoofbeats and the whispers of ancient winds, a testament to a people who lived and thrived where few dared to tread.